The meeting will come to order. We've got a serious crowd here today, which is wonderful because the 68 interns that we are fortunate enough to have at this agency are filling the room. I encourage you, I request you to all find a seat. There's plenty of seats over here. Let's see if we can all get some seats and make yourself comfortable. Those of you who are standing along the walls over here, please. We also need to put today's meeting in context with a tragedy that happened last night in Charleston, South Carolina. To many of us, that is a news item. To one of us, it is very personal. And if it were not for this meeting, Commissioner Clyburn would be in Charleston, grieving with the community and her friends who were the victims. So, Commissioner, we're grateful to you for being here today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is an emotional day for anybody who was born in Charleston or for anyone who has a heart. 9 lives, 9 lights were extinguished about 9 o'clock last night. I met Clemente Pinckney when he was a state representative, and I was running for the PSC. Those of you who've gotten to know me a little bit, I can have a little aggressive attitude and demeanor. And I was trying to count votes because I needed 50% plus 1 to get on the commission. And so I asked, and in his gentle spirit, then Representative Pinckney was a bit coy. I asked again, got a little bit more aggressive, and I could tell I was irritating him quite a bit. But in the end, he delivered the vote for me, and he's part of the reason why I sit before you today. I apologize to you for the cracking of my voice. I apologize to you for the emotion that I am displaying today. You think you've got a handle on all of the possibilities that the world and situations could throw at you until something like this happens. Pray for Charleston, pray for those families. Clemente and his sister deserve so much better. But I hope that what we will glean from this is a challenge for us to be beacons of light like those people who assembled in that church for weekly prayer. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we all join with you in our mourning. Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will hear 3 items for your consideration. First, you will consider a report and order that will facilitate innovative technologies and services by establishing a process to authorize interconnected VoIP providers to obtain telephone numbers directly from the numbering administrators rather than through intermediaries. Second, you will consider a second further notice of proposed rulemaking, order on reconsideration, second report and order, and memorandum opinion and order in order to comprehensively restructure and modernize the Lifeline program to efficiently and effectively connect low-income Americans to broadband, strengthen program oversight and administration, and take additional measures to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse. Third, you will consider a declaratory ruling and order reaffirming the Telephone Consumer Protection Act's protections against unwanted robocalls, encouraging pro-consumer uses of robocall technology, and responding to a number of requests for clarity from businesses and other parties. This is your agenda for today. Please note item 4 listed in the Commission's June 11th Sunshine Notice entitled Expanding the Economic and Innovation Opportunities of Spectrum Through Incentive Auctions was adopted by the Commission and deleted from today's agenda. The first item will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Numbering Policies for Modern Communications. Matt Del Nero, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you.
Matt, is this your premier presentation as the big boss?
I think so.
I think so. Break a leg.
Thank you. Okay, do my best. Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Pleased to present to you a report and order that would establish a process to authorize interconnected VoIP providers to obtain telephone numbers directly from numbering administrators, rather than through intermediary carriers. The forward-looking, pro-competitive measures taken in this report and order will promote and support ongoing transitions in our communications infrastructure. On behalf of the Wireline Competition Bureau, I would like to thank our colleagues in offices and bureaus throughout the Commission for their contributions to the item. I would also like to thank Lisa Gelb, Dina Shetler, Randy Clark, Pam Arlick, Ann Stevens, Victoria Goldberg, Marilyn Jones, Melissa Kirkle, and John Visklowski for their work to prepare this item. With me at the table are three of those people: Randy Clark, Chief of the Competition Policy Division; Ann Stevens, Deputy Chief of the Competition Policy Division; and Marilyn Jones, Attorney Advisor in the Competition Policy Division. Marilyn will present the item.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. The report and order before you today supports the Commission's efforts to further ongoing technology transitions in our communications infrastructure. The actions taken and processes established in the order will facilitate innovative technologies and services that will benefit both consumers and providers, and will further the Commission's recognized pro-consumer, pro-competition, and public safety goals. Under the Commission's current rules, as a practical matter, only traditional telecommunication carriers or wireless licensees are typically able to obtain telephone numbers. In 2013, the Commission took two significant steps toward allowing interconnected VoIP providers to access numbers directly. First, it proposed rules to allow interconnected VoIP providers to obtain telephone numbers directly from the numbering administrators, subject to certain requirements. Second, it established a 6-month technical trial to allow interconnected VoIP providers to obtain direct access to numbers on a limited basis. 5 providers participated in the trial, placing over 4,500 new telephone numbers into service. In December of 2013, the Bureau released a report on the findings of the trial, concluding that it is technically feasible for interconnected VoIP providers to obtain telephone numbers directly from numbering administrators and use those numbers to provide services, while preserving the integrity of the network. Building on the findings of that successful trial, the report and order we present today adopts rules to establish a process by which interconnected VoIP providers can seek Commission authorization to obtain numbers directly. To do so, interconnected VoIP providers must comply with the Commission's numbering rules as well as relevant industry guidelines and practices. They must also notify relevant state commissions at least 30 days before requesting numbers. In addition, applicants must provide proof of compliance with Commission's facilities readiness requirements, certify that they have the requisite technical, managerial, and financial capacity to provide service, and also certify that they comply with USF, 911, and other obligations. The report and order further finds that interconnected VoIP consumers should enjoy the benefits of local number portability and adopts rules to facilitate such consumer benefits. The report and order directs the North American Numbering Council to examine specific considerations for interconnected VoIP provider porting and report back to the Commission within 6 months. Lastly, the report and order adopts measures to enhance public safety and ensure proper routing of emergency services calls,
Specifically, the reporting order revises the Commission's rules to permit VoIP Positioning Center, or VPC, services providers, entities that help interconnected VoIP providers deliver 911 calls, to directly access information needed for delivery of E911 services. The Bureau recommends adoption of the reporting order and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Protecting consumers while instituting simple, streamlined rules that promote competition and innovation based on data-driven processes are key aspects of good governance. I submit, Mr. Chairman, that this order embodies all of these principles. I have long advocated for modernizing our rules in a way that promotes innovation and investment in the marketplace, while holding true to the core values of the Act, including competition, consumer protection, universal service, and public safety. All IP networks offer more redundancy and the introduction of new innovative services. Therefore, I support this item because I believe it satisfies all of these objectives. Before moving to a blanket order authorizing interconnected VoIP providers to receive direct access to numbers, however, the Commission conducted a trial to determine if there were any technical concerns or issues related to compliance with policies such as intercarrier compensation. The trial report identified no such concerns, so today we are poised to adopt this order and establish a permanent process for interconnected VoIP providers to receive direct access to numbers with actual data demonstrating that the process works. This will enable the Commission to proceed in a prudent and well-reasoned fashion. To me, this epitomizes good government and sound decision-making. I am also pleased that the order includes sufficient checks in the authorization process, including certifying compliance with our numbering rules, as well as contributions to universal service, to help ensure that entities are in good standing before requesting numbers. The item also ensures that the Commission has full legal authority to take action if an entity violates our numbering rules. Additionally, the order improves transparency of numbering allocation by satisfying when it's appropriate to designate a number as assigned to ensure that it's being used by an end user rather than being held by a provider. And I appreciate the recognition of the state role with respect to numbers and the continued federal-state partnership on this important issue. While I am supportive of the order, I would be remiss if I failed to mention the elephant in the room, the classification of VoIP. For over a decade, this agency has punted on this issue, and unfortunately, we continue this trend by failing to make a decision. This must end. We should make a decision and stand by it. I want to thank the Wireline Competition Bureau for their diligent work, not only on this item, but also on the trial and trial report. Because of your tremendous work, we are able to move forward today. Finally, I want to confirm that it is indeed your first meeting as Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau. So congratulations, and I want to welcome you to the big chair as Bureau Chief, and I really appreciate all the work that you continue to do. The best to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
It was 2 decades ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents in Hartford, Connecticut, announced that the childhood telephone number I had always known would change. Area code 203 was no more. Welcome to area code 860. This was hardly a big deal in the history of communications. But it was the first time I remember thinking about the link between place and number and community and identity. What felt strange 20 years ago now seems quaint. Today, 44% of households have cut the cord and use only wireless service. In my office, that percentage is a lot higher, and the numbers associated with our devices are a jumble of area codes from all across the country. We are severing place and number like never before, and the platforms we use to communicate are evolving faster than ever before, not only from wireline to wireless, but also from low speed to high speed. Beyond that, they are multiplying into new forms with a range of messaging applications built into social networks and applications that may in time turn into new communications hubs. With this rush of change, one thing is clear. It is time for the Commission to change too. That's why today's decision is the right one. Even better, it puts in place an idea we incubated here in our very own policy sandbox. 2 years ago, we launched a trial process to see if it was technically feasible for interconnected VoIP providers to obtain access to numbering resources directly. The trial provided a proof of concept. It helped guide today's effort to update the authorization process so that more communications providers can access numbering resources and develop more innovative services. In addition, this effort will improve access to a key input for 911 emergency services. Now, the mechanics of this proceeding are complex, but at its core, this decision is a simple reminder of how our networks are in a period of profound change. The communications devices in my childhood home no longer look anything like they did 20 years ago. We can reach out and connect in ways that were unthinkable back when the area code I always knew was changed. This is change for the good, and I think our work here today is too, so it has my full support.
Thank you, Commissioner, and for the trip down memory lane. Commissioner Pai.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before getting into my statement, I want to thank you for recognizing the tragedy in Charleston yesterday and to extend my condolences to the families of those affected, the friends of those affected, including Commissioner Clyburn. I think Dr. King put it well many years ago when he said, hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And I certainly hope that the community of Charleston and the country writ large embrace that ethos in the unfortunate days to come. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the business at hand. For those of us born under the Ma Bell system, today is the future. Consumers are giving up their copper landlines and are embracing the IP transition. A monopoly has been replaced by hundreds of competitors. Interconnected VoIP providers now serve a majority of residential consumers and an increasing number of enterprises. And innovations, both on the network and riding over it, abound. But the Commission's rules are stuck 30 years in the past. Despite the technological changes that are reshaping the way Americans communicate, our rules still presume that all calls originate and terminate on the public switch telephone network, that routing must be done using last-generation switches and SS7, and that telephones are tied to a particular geographic area. It's time to modernize our rules and give interconnected VoIP providers direct access to telephone numbers so that they can serve their customers without paying off so-called intermediate carriers, basically middlemen that simply raise the cost of interconnected VoIP service. It's been over a year since the successful interconnected VoIP numbering trial and more than a decade since we started looking at the regulatory framework for IP-enabled services. So there's nothing left to hold us back. To that end, I'm especially excited that we have made clear that interconnected VoIP providers need only apply once to serve anywhere in the nation. This one-and-done system keeps regulatory barriers to telephone numbers low, and this will ultimately benefit would-be competitors and competition. I'm nonetheless disappointed that we are not reforming another aspect of our numbering system, and that is how we pay for it. The Commission established the current payment scheme back in 1998. But it's come under increasing strain. One problem is that our system departs from the long-standing regulatory principle of linking costs and benefits. This means that some carriers financially benefit from the numbering system's bells and whistles, in regulatory speak, things like intra-provider ports and modifies, while their competitors have to pick up the tab. Another problem is that payments are assessed on a declining and unsustainable base. telecommunications revenues, even though more and more numbers are in service. This mismatch perversely means that carriers that make a business of vending telephone numbers may contribute nothing at all. We need to pry these rules out of the muck of the past. I'm grateful to my colleagues for accepting my suggestions to improve this order, and I want to thank the numbering team in the Wireline Competition Bureau, Randy Clark, Marilyn Jones, Melissa Kirkle, Ann Stevens, and John Visclosky, along with my old friend, Matt Del Nero, welcome to the hot seat, or the big chair, or choose your analogy, for their innumerable efforts, shall we say, to get this done right. Consumers benefit when we eliminate unnecessary regulatory barriers to innovation and investment. And with today's action, that's exactly what we have done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I appreciate all of the good work that has gone into this item. The obvious failure here is taking 10 years to complete any proceeding. Let's put this debate in perspective. This proceeding has survived 4 chairmen and 2 acting chairmen, 8 commissioners, and 6 Wireline Bureau chiefs. By nearly all accounts, this item, given that it does not consist of the most complex subject matter, epitomizes the federal government bureaucracy. Channeling Commissioner Pye by quoting a movie, there's an appropriate line from one of my favorites, Grosse Point Blank, when the Jeremy Piven character turns to John Cusack character and says, 10 years, man! Where have you been for 10 years? Substantively, the tenets of this decision contained in this item seem anachronistic at this point in time. In fact, I must admit that I find the entire debate rooted in a technology and a system that is fading, and fading fast. Consumers, especially younger consumers, do not care about the specific telephone number, care even less about a specific area code, have little fondness for voice communications, and are considering a breakup with traditional SMS texting. To be completely honest, given my use of contact lists in my smartphone and the auspices of the internet cloud, I do not know a single telephone number except my own. No one uses phone books anymore, and telephone numbers are on the way out. I'm also skeptical of the justifications provided in this item. For example, the argument that VoIP providers need direct access to telephone numbers in order to compete with other modes of voice providers seems overblown, given that VoIP has become mainstream in today's marketplace, even without this capacity. The item notes that the number of residential interconnected VoIP subscribers increased from 19.7 million subscribers in December 2008 to 37.7 million subscribers in December 2013. Indeed, that report marked the first time that VoIP represented more than half of residential wireline connections. Moreover, the item doesn't attempt to quantify any aspect of VoIP costs to obtain numbers from other providers, mainly CLACs, although I've been told anecdotally it's about $1 million per month for one major provider. Nonetheless, it's time to bring this proceeding to a close, and I will support the item because I don't see any great harm in moving forward, especially since it contains a number of edits I sought. In particular, the item now makes clear that VoIP direct access to numbers is completely voluntary and no way mandatory. It also makes crystal clear that the scope of the item is limited to the telephone numbering system of today, tied to the PSTN, and does not extend to any new developments such as IP addresses, enum domain names, or any other unique identifiers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a statement for the record that we have filed for the record. There's no need to pile on here. The need for this item is clear, so I will call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. The item is carried. The request for editorial privileges is granted and objection noted. Madam Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, the next item on your agenda is also presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. It is entitled Lifeline and Link Up Reform.
Sticking around, huh, Matt? I like the job so much.
Just glad the first item was unanimous. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Back at you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning again, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Today, the Wireline Competition Bureau presents you with the next step in the Commission's comprehensive modernization and reform of the Universal Service Lifeline program. The item before you is a second further notice of proposed rulemaking, an order on reconsideration, a second report on order, and memorandum opinion on and order. Since 1985, Lifeline has helped make telephone service affordable to low-income Americans, and the measures proposed before you today will help the program meet today's essential communication needs, doing so by making available to low-income households voice and broadband service. The item builds off the Commission's 2012 reform order by further strengthening protections against waste and abuse in the program while improving program administration and transparency. The item finds that now is the time to reboot the Lifeline program and seeks comment on a path forward to ensure that all Americans can share in the opportunities presented by 21st century communications. As you might imagine, a lot of work went into putting this item together. It was written and refined by staff of the Wireline Competition Bureau, working closely with colleagues in the Office of Native Affairs and Policy, Office of Strategic Planning and Policy Analysis, Office of Managing Director, Office of General Counsel, Wireline Telecommunications Bureau, among others. In addition to those at the table with me, I'd like to acknowledge the Lifeline team in the Bureau for all their hard work on the item. This core team has been dedicated in their commitment to improving the program. It includes Regina Brown, Jody Griffin, Garnett Hanley, Radhika Karmarkar, Greg Kwan, Anita Patanker-Stoll, and WCB alums Michelle Schaefer and Ramonda Williams. And if I may, I wanted to mention one other WCB alumnus who more than merits mention. I've picked up some sports analogies for some reason in the past year, and I came into this in the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter. My friend, mentor, and predecessor, Julie Veach, was instrumental in this item. You can see in it her vision and leadership throughout, so I felt it important to mention that. With that, joining me at the table are Associate Bureau Chief in WCB, Trent Harcrater, and from our Telecommunications Access Policy Division, Chief Ryan Palmer, Acting Deputy Chief Jonathan Lecter, and Garnett Haley, Special Counsel, and Attorney Advisor Christopher Cook, and Chris will present the item.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I am very pleased to present the next set of proposals to modernize the Lifeline program, which for nearly 30 years has ensured that qualifying low-income Americans have the opportunities and security that phone service brings. In the Telecommunications Act of 1996, Congress recognized the importance of the Lifeline program and formalized its commitment to ensuring access for low-income consumers to advanced telecommunications and information services. The item before you finds that in order to continue to serve its statutory purpose, the Lifeline program must evolve to reflect the realities of the 21st century communications marketplace, and it must do so in a way that ensures both the beneficiaries of the program, as well as those that pay into the Universal Service Fund, are receiving optimum value for the support dispersed. The further notice seeks comment on proposals for modernizing the Lifeline program to make it more efficient, accountable, and effective at helping low-income consumers access the communications technology they need to participate in today's society. At the same time, the further notice proposes additional protections against waste, fraud, and abuse. First, to ensure that both Lifeline subscribers and ratepayers are getting the best possible value from the service delivered, the notice proposes to establish minimum service standards for both voice and broadband. The notice also proposes to adopt a permanent support amount of $9.25 and seeks comment on a budget for the program. Next, the notice proposes to further reduce any incentive for waste, fraud, and abuse by having a third party determine consumers' eligibility for Lifeline, rather than keeping that role with the Lifeline providers. The notice also seeks on coordinating with other federal programs and state agencies as a basis to educate consumers and potentially enroll qualifying consumers in the Lifeline program. Another area of comment concerns ways to increase competition and innovation in the Lifeline marketplace. The notice also proposes measures to enhance consumer protections and update the program rules to better reflect the manner in which consumers currently use Lifeline service. Additionally, the notice seeks ways to increase the efficient administration of the Lifeline program. For instance, building on the recent report by the GAO, the notice discusses and seeks comment on the adoption of metrics to track the effectiveness of the Lifeline program. The related second report and order takes further steps to put in place measures that increase accountability, efficiency, and transparency in the program and protect ratepayer dollars. Specifically, the order establishes a uniform snapshot date each month for ETCs to calculate their number of subscribers for the purpose of reimbursement. It also eliminates the requirement that ILECs must resell retail Lifeline discounted service and limits the reimbursement for Lifeline service to ETCs directly serving Lifeline customers. Lastly, the order sets in motion a process to align the lands eligible for enhanced tribal Lifeline support with those recognized by the U.S. Department of Interior, Bureau of Indian Affairs. To that end, the order directs the Wireline Competition Bureau and the Office of Native American Policy to actively seek government-to-government consultation with tribal nations in Oklahoma. In taking these steps, the item seeks to bring tribal Lifeline support in line with well-recognized tribal boundaries. The item also includes an order on reconsideration that grants in part a petition for reconsideration and requires ETCs to securely retain documentation demonstrating subscriber eligibility, as well as a memorandum opinion and order that affirms a Wireline Competition Bureau's decision making certain Lifeline information public, and in doing so, furthers transparency in the program. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cook. Mr. Clyburn.
Technology is, in a word, remarkable. We marvel over how it is breaking down long-standing barriers, providing unprecedented access to jobs, world-class education, healthcare, and innovative services. It literally is transforming lives. But the sad reality is that millions of our citizens are foreclosed from opportunities, trapped in digital darkness, and are stranded on the wrong side of the affordability divide. For the past 30 years, the FCC has possessed the tools needed to build a bridge for these struggling Americans, a path that could aid in transporting consumers out of poverty and isolation to connectivity and independence. But in recent years, despite having the ability to retrofit that bridge for the digital age, we were idle, allowing our fundamental tools to rust in the FCC's woodshed. Today, however, we launch a process that could rid us of these antiquated constructs and launch a 21st century program that will provide households that have fallen on hard times more hope, more options, and more opportunities. When I made it known that reforming Lifeline was a priority for me, Mr. Chairman, I was literally asked if I were off my rocker. Now, I'm not going to ask you to answer that question. It was also said that does she know how politically sensitive a topic this is? The answers are no and yes. The safe course would be one of inaction, but the oath that I took requires that I try and use all of the tools in my regulatory arsenal to close chronic divides and stay true to those words in the statute. We must not wait, remain idle, or play it safe when it comes to this program, for we know that broadband is the greatest technology equalizer of our time. But it can be only so if everyone has access. If we fail or never try, the promises that broadband brings will be reserved only for the privileged. Decision makers cannot wait. We can ill afford to tuck our heads in the sand, throw our hands up in frustration, or walk away from the challenge before us, particularly when we have the chance and the means to craft good policy, institute sound management, and deploy targeted efforts that may be the key to turning the tide in persistent poverty areas. The FCC cannot wait. We displayed our capacity to be unwavering in our commitment to universal service with the other programs, and must keep in mind that Congress's dictate to this commission is simple and clear. Services should be affordable to all consumers, including, and I quote, low-income consumers, and those in rural, insular, and high-cost areas should have access to advanced telecommunications and information services, end quote. I was proud to support reforms to our high-cost universal service program. It put this country on a path to ubiquitous broadband availability. But deployment is only one part of the congressional directive to ensure that both rural areas and low-income consumers have reasonably comparable services. The Commission should treat our universal service obligation for low-income consumers as the statute treats them, with equal weight. The time is now to shed that 20th century Lifeline voice-only product and adopt a 21st century model, because a voice-only supported program is inconsistent with the statute's directive to ensure that low-income consumers have access to advanced telecommunications and information services. But first, we must design a future-proof program that enables low-income consumers to have access to broadband services comparable to everyone else. Second class, inferior service, that is unacceptable and should not be eligible for universal service support. Second, this program must be free of its current stigma. Consumers should be treated with dignity. They should no longer be forced to turn over financially sensitive information to an unknown person, in front of a group of strangers, inside of a parking lot or tent. Seniors, veterans, the disabled, children, and others deserve much better. We must also demand more than the de minimis service offerings by some. Third, we need competitive options. We should encourage broader participation by thinking outside of the box, reducing unnecessary administrative burdens, and rethinking the process for participation in the program. Fourth, but just as important as the first, we need enhanced oversight to further eliminate all incentives for waste, fraud, and abuse. A neutral third party, not the carrier, should determine consumer eligibility, and we must plug any other loophole in the current Lifeline program. Finally, we should reduce administrative burdens by leveraging efficiencies from other benefit programs and seek comment on working with existing states' programs to determine eligibility. I will be among the first to admit that there have been issues with Lifeline in the past, but I will also be the first to proclaim that this agency has been denied the credit it deserves for the results of the tremendous bipartisan Lifeline reforms of 2012. We have saved this fund over $2.75 billion, have put the program on a sounder footing, eliminated duplicates, and according to reports since our reform, Lifeline has a better efficiency index when it comes to waste and fraud prevention than most of our other universal service or TRS programs. While the statistics continue to confirm this, I realize that no report, no matter how credible, nor any words from me will change the current perception or rhetoric. But that will not deter me from remaining committed to endorsing all necessary steps to make this program a best practice benefits program. The proposals in this notice, including eliminating carriers from determining customer eligibility and other steps to tighten up the program, are the first steps in ensuring its credibility. While establishing a cap has been the call of many, the best way, in my opinion, to discipline program expenditures is to focus on leveraging this program to reduce poverty in this nation with other programs so that the number of eligible households decline, which means that Lifeline expenditures will decline. We should focus on making Lifeline part of the pathway out of poverty and make this program so successful and so enabling that recipients no longer need it or any other federal benefit program because they no longer qualify. I challenge all of us to be as bold and as visionary as those high-tech companies we marvel over. If we are not careful and embrace an artificial budget, I fear, or set an arbitrary amount, we risk foreclosing eligible low-income households from connectivity when they need it the most, and we will ensure that too many of our citizens will remain stuck in those digital badlands and cycles of poverty and technological despair for yet another block of years. My staff and I have personally invested significant time over the past several weeks in attempts to reach a bipartisan compromise. In the spirit of compromise, despite my concerns, I not only offered to seek comment on a budget of $1.6 billion, I offered to support proposing a budget if we could see comment on what the appropriate budget should be. Even this was not enough, and I find that unwillingness to compromise, which where I come from is the settling of mutual differences, unfortunate. I also resist usually the temptation from raising concerns about the process, but I will continue to work with the Bureau in order to straighten out what turned out to be some very difficult and taxing exchanges over the past several days, and I look forward to working with you to minimize that in the future. But I am anxious, despite all of that, to move forward in crafting a 21st century blueprint for Lifeline. A rebooted program could be the best investment this government makes because the network effects and reverberating benefits to society will be tremendous. One area I've been passionate about is healthcare and what technology can do to improve outcomes. The potentials for Lifeline to be a catalyst here have been too often overlooked. In a recent telemedical trial, for example, healthcare costs were reduced by 27%, acute and long-term costs were reduced by 32%, and hospitalizations were reduced by 45%. Just imagine the possibilities if everyone could afford broadband and make use of these technologies. Mr. Chairman, I look forward to moving from today's blueprint to adopting a foundation and building a new program as we move to order. The time is now to build the bridge to empowerment, independence, and connectivity. Let's sunset Lifeline, and let's replace it with what I call iBridge Now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Clyburn, for so many things in so many areas on this topic where you have been such a leader. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
All right. Well, get comfortable. I'm a little long, too. 30 years ago, the Lifeline program got its start when President Ronald Reagan was in the White House, and most communications involved a cord. For 3 decades, this program has helped the neediest among us connect. Connect to family, jobs, health care, and help when emergency strikes. These connections make us stronger. That is why, over time, the Commission updated the Lifeline program to include both wireline and wireless telephony. Today, we continue on this course with a rulemaking to update the Lifeline program to include broadband. I support this rulemaking because I believe a well-run, up-to-date Lifeline program is worth the effort. If we do it right, we will modernize the Lifeline program to incorporate broadband. If we do it right, we will increase accountability and internal controls. And if we do it right, we will expand opportunity for too many among us who for too long have been consigned to the wrong side of the digital divide. There are so many reasons this rulemaking is important, but I want to bring laser-like focus on one of them, the homework gap. When I was growing up, homework required nothing more than your siblings leaving you alone, a clear workspace, and a number 2 pencil. Gone are the days, not just because the school year is winding down. They are gone because today as many as 7 in 10 teachers assign homework that requires access to broadband. But data from this commission suggests that 1 in 3 households do not subscribe to broadband service. So let's do the math and think about those numbers. Where they overlap is what I call the homework gap. And according to the Pew Research Center, the homework gap is real because there are 5 million households out of the 29 million households in this country with school-aged children that lack access to broadband. Now think about what it means to be a student in a household without broadband. Just getting basic schoolwork done is hard. Applying for a scholarship is challenging. Researching or typing a paper is tough. Borrowing a device and finding a signal that is not password protected becomes a prerequisite for getting any schoolwork done. This is a quest too many students struggle with every day. And the evidence is all around us. Earlier this year, the Hispanic Heritage Foundation and Family Online Safety Institute found that nearly 50% of students say they have been unable to complete a homework assignment because they did not have access to the internet or a computer. On top of that, 42% of students say they received a lower grade on an assignment because they didn't have access to the internet. We can do better than this. We must. Because students who lack regular broadband access are struggling to keep up, and their lack of access is holding our education system back. In fact, according to the Pew Research Center, more than half of teachers in low-income communities have said that their students' lack of access to online resources at home presents a major challenge to integrating technology into their teaching. And that's a problem because 1/2 of all jobs now require some level of digital skills. By the end of the decade, that number will be 77%. School-aged kids without broadband access at home are not only unable to complete their homework, they enter the job market with a serious handicap. And that loss is more than individual. It's a loss to our collective human capital and shared economic future that we need to address. If soapbox statistics don't make this clear, I think stories will. Take Citronelle, Alabama. After school, students head to McDonald's. They head to a fast food restaurant because it is one of the few places in town with Wi-Fi. So students who do not have broadband at home hunker down in booths to do their homework. They research and write their papers with fizzy drinks and a side of fries. In Pinconning, Michigan, up near Saginaw Bay, there's a fast food franchisee who says he can tell when exams are coming up in the local school district. That's because students without online access at home file into his restaurant with laptops in tow. Those who cannot afford food and drink simply sit with their devices in the parking lot. Often their parents drive them there, doing what they can on limited incomes to catch a signal to help their children complete basic school assignments. In Cutler Bay, Florida, which is just south of Miami, parents of young kids who lack broadband at home shuffle into the library. They queue up for computers to get their children time online to do their schoolwork. The lines are long and the wait times are tough. But the need is real because there are Miami-Dade County high schools that use digital history textbooks and elementary schools that use a math program that requires online access. Now, these students in Alabama, Michigan, and Florida are actually the lucky ones. They do not have broadband at home, but with grit, ingenuity, and the help of their parents, they have found ways to cobble together the connectivity they need to get their schoolwork done. But it's hard. So what can we do? Back to Lifeline. Today, we start a process to modernize Lifeline and incorporate broadband into the program. We ask questions about putting in place minimum standards to make sure the program is cost-effective and fair. In addition, we seek to streamline the eligibility process and reduce the potential for fraud by taking enrollment out of the hands of carriers. We also seek input on a number of other common sense changes to improve program administration and reduce waste, including improvements to the National Lifeline Accountability Database. Of course, Lifeline is only part of the equation. Solving the homework gap requires more than modernizing the program we discuss here, but it's a start. Combine this effort with more Wi-Fi in more places and innovative initiatives like the wireless hotspots available for loan at the New York Public Library and the routers added to school buses to assist with ride-time connectivity for homework by Coachella, a rural farming community in California. And we will develop new ways for students to get their homework done. We need more creative efforts just like these, and we need them now. Because this is about the future. The future of our economy, our country, and our success is built on a digital and diverse workforce. We all know that science, technology, engineering, and math are the fastest growing fields in the new economy. We also know that the diversity of our STEM workforce does not mirror the diversity of our population. It's time to fix this and make our kids, all of our kids, not just digital consumers, but digital creators. And there are a lot of things we can do to make this happen, but we can start by making it possible for all students to do their homework. And we can begin with modernizing the Lifeline program right here, right now, today. Because the homework gap is the cruelest part of the digital divide, but it is within our power to bridge it. So let me thank the chairman for putting this rulemaking before the commission today. And let me also thank Commissioner Clyburn for her dedication, her unwavering dedication, to raising the profile of this program. This rulemaking has my full support.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for your leadership on the homework gap issue. I think you were the author of the term.
Yes.
I
haven't copyrighted it.
You haven't copyrighted.
I just want to solve it.
and you continue to focus us on this critical issue as you have explained today, and we're grateful for your leadership on that. Mr. Pai.
Let me begin by quoting President Ronald Reagan, who, to my pleasant surprise, apparently is a universally loved figure from this dais. The president famously once said, "Government is like a baby, an alimentary canal with a big appetite on one end and no sense of responsibility on the other." To many, that is an apt analogy for today's Lifeline program. To be sure, Lifeline was established in 1985 during the Reagan administration in order to help make telephone service more affordable for low-income Americans. But that Lifeline program was vastly different than the one we have now, as you can see from this slide. To equate the two is like saying that The Godfather Part 2 is the same as Paul Blart Mall Cop 2 because both are movie sequels. The reality is this. Adjusting for inflation, the Lifeline program today is over 23 times as large as it was at the end of the Reagan administration. And soon, it'll be even larger. For its first 2 decades, the Lifeline program largely worked without controversy. But a few years ago, it lost its way. Discounted service was replaced by free service and free phone giveaways. Unscrupulous operators exploited the program for their own benefit. Ineligible consumers signed up. Numerous people enrolled in Lifeline multiple times. The end result was massive waste, fraud, and abuse. And the American people lost confidence in the program. From 2008 to 2012, Lifeline spending grew from $821 million to over $2.1 billion, an increase of over 160%. And the number of consumers participating in the program exploded from about 6.7 million to about 17.2 million. Even Lifeline's fiercest defenders were forced to acknowledge that the program was a mess, and the FCC needed to bring it under control. In 2012, the FCC enacted reforms designed to prevent individuals from receiving more than one Lifeline subsidy and to enforce the program's eligibility limits. And these changes have helped. But we still have a long way to go if we are going to fix this program. Today, Lifeline spending and enrollment are still almost double what they were at the end of 2008. Waste, fraud, and abuse are still rampant. And in a report issued earlier this year, the Nonpartisan Government Accountability Office, or GAO, concluded, and I quote, "The Lifeline program as currently structured may be a rather inefficient and costly mechanism to increase telephone subscribership among low-income households." Here is one example from last November of the program's problems.
Tonight, our CBS 4 investigative team has a new cell phone that you paid for, along with our phone bill. And you're right, that never should have happened.
The phone that was handed out free to us through a government program that's supposed to be for those in need. But our investigator Brian Moss discovered it is riddled with abuse.
They are handing out the free cell phones like Halloween candy.
I think it's a good deal.
A treat for those getting free phones, but we found it's a bit of a trick on you. Pay for the program through a tax on your monthly bill. The idea is that recipients get these free phones to help them find work or call 911.
Do you have a food stamp card?
To be eligible for the free phone, you have to prove you're low income with a food stamp card, Medicaid, or other proof of need.
You want to sign up for a free phone?
Sure.
A picture ID, food stamp card, or picture ID, Medicaid card?
I don't have Medicaid.
You have food stamp?
No.
We sent an undercover producer to downtown Denver to ask about the phones, even though he does not qualify.
We'll push it through by that time maybe somebody come through and use the...
Hang on, what did he just say?
Push it through by that time maybe somebody come through.
So they then use someone else's food stamp card to make our producer eligible for the phone.
Did you use that dude's food stamp card for me?
It's a verification that you're on some kind of assistance program. That's all.
Okay, but you used his card for me. That's cool.
Yeah.
It's against federal rules, but the employee did it anyway. He has an incentive to do this because he's paid $3 for each phone he hands out.
You have a good day, sir.
You too.
Several times. The workers handing out the Lifeline phone said if we didn't have our own food stamp card, we could qualify with someone else's.
But I can use my ID, use somebody else's social security card or something like that.
Use somebody else's food stamp card.
My buddy's card, my buddy's EBT card or whatever, or something like that. Yeah, I think so. It could be all right.
That, too, is against federal regulations, but the questionable practices go even further.
You got one?
Take this man. He told us he didn't qualify for a free phone, but he found an easy shortcut, getting a food stamp card to use as a prop.
They said I don't qualify, but they still gave me the card.
And with that card, you pay for his phone and monthly minutes, even though he showed us he already has a smartphone.
Now, what we just saw from last November was clearly illegal. But all of the available evidence suggests that Denver is not an anomaly. This is happening all over the country. And aside from unlawful abuse of the program, Lifeline is plagued by waste that is lawful. Case in point, Oklahoma. Across the country, the typical Lifeline subsidy is $9.25 per month. But those who live on tribal lands receive $34.25 per month, whether or not they are members of a tribe. Now, this is a big deal because the FCC treats virtually all of Oklahoma as tribal land. And so, as you can see from this slide, of the 307,434,000 Oklahomans receiving Lifeline support at the end of 2014, only 339, 0.11%, did not qualify for the enhanced tribal subsidy. How much does this cost consumers? Well, the $128 million in Lifeline funds bestowed upon Oklahoma in 2014 was the second highest of any state, despite the fact that Oklahoma ranks only 28th in population. Nationally, the Lifeline program spends about $5 per person. But in Oklahoma, Lifeline spending is about $33 a person, which is over 6 times the national average and over 10 times the amount that neighboring Kansas receives. If Lifeline spending in Oklahoma were only twice the national average, which would still be more than every state but Alaska, Americans would save $89 million a year, which itself is more than 5% of the total cost of the program. The differences are also staggering at the household level. Currently, for example, a non-Native American in Tulsa, Oklahoma is eligible for $300 more per year in subsidies than a low-income person in East Los Angeles or in Appalachia. This is unbelievable. My priorities for the Lifeline program, which I outlined almost a year ago, are clear. We must implement meaningful reforms to restore fiscal responsibility. We must root out waste, fraud, and abuse. We must target Lifeline funding on the people who actually need it. And we must ensure that the dollars coming from hardworking Americans' phone bills each and every month are wisely spent. Unfortunately, this document does not reflect these priorities, and this is disappointing. At a March 18th Senate Commerce Committee hearing, Senator Claire McCaskill asked us to speak up for the record if we objected to a list of 4 Lifeline reforms she set forth to promote fiscal responsibility. Things like requiring beneficiaries to have skin in the game, as she put it, or imposing a fiscal cap on the program. 4 of the 5 commissioners did not speak up when she again asked whether, quote, anybody disagrees with those reforms. But today, the Commission refuses by and large to include those reforms as proposals. Instead of fixing the program, it proposes to expand an open-ended spendthrift entitlement. This is irresponsible. Let me be clear. I am open to having a conversation about including broadband in the Lifeline program. But any such change must go hand in hand with the reforms that are necessary to producing a fiscally responsible program. And this proposal fails that basic test for several reasons. First reason, it does not even propose a specific budget to prevent runaway spending in the future and to reduce fraud. As discussed above, since 2008, Lifeline spending has almost doubled, growing from $821 million to $1.6 billion per year today. And during this time, the universal service tax rate on every American's phone bill has increased by 83%, even as Americans' median income has gone down over the same period. Yet today, Lifeline remains the only one of the 4 Universal Service Fund programs that has not been placed on a budget. A budget induces careful spending. This is as true for the federal government as it is for you or me. When spending is capped, funds are spent wisely and where they are most needed. And because a capped pool of funds improves accountability for each dollar spent, a budget increases the incentives for eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. Moreover, if we expand the program to include broadband without a budget, little would prevent the program from doubling in size again, with American consumers on the hook for the increase. And again, the nonpartisan GAO shares these concerns. In its Lifeline report, GAO observed that, and I quote again, the risk of significant costs to the program are even greater with respect to broadband than voice, given that the FCC notes that a lesson learned from the broadband pilot program is that higher monthly subsidies have the highest participation rates. Now, putting the Lifeline program on a budget is not a new or novel idea. In the 2012 reform order, the FCC stated that it fully expected to have the information to determine an appropriate budget for the program in 2013. 2 years after that deadline, we have that information. So at a minimum, we should have proposed setting the budget at the current spending level of $1.6 billion. A $1.6 billion cap, along with other critical reforms, would ensure a bigger bang for our bucks and would promote fiscal responsibility. Now, for 2 weeks, I pushed for this proposal, and the answer was no. But then, suddenly, late yesterday afternoon, the chairman's office presented the Republican commissioners with a last-minute offer out of the blue. They were prepared to propose an annual budget of $1.6 billion to last through the end of 2016. But even if all goes smoothly, an expansion of the broadband program will not even begin to be widely implemented until the end of 2016. So having a budget that would expire before the broadband expansion was completely operational was a joke. But it gets worse. Even this 1 year, $1.6 billion budget had a gigantic loophole. It would have allowed up to 4.2 million new households to sign up for the program, irrespective of the budget. This alone could have cost up to $465 million each and every year. So the 1 year, $1.6 billion budget was really a 1 year, $2 billion budget. In the spirit of finding common ground, Commissioner O'Reilly and I offered a compromise, a proposal for a $1.6 billion budget through the end of 2018 with an annual increase for inflation and no loopholes. This was a big concession. We were prepared to vote for a proposal to permanently expand the Lifeline program to include broadband in exchange for a 3-year budget proposal. We were prepared to go more than halfway to find consensus. But our proposal was rejected, as were other bipartisan entreaties that would have sought comment on a budget in a neutral rather than a slanted fashion. As a result, this item does not contain any budget proposal. The second reason why this plan fails the test. The document does not propose requiring Lifeline subscribers to pitch in as a condition of getting service. We should have proposed requiring Lifeline recipients to make a minimum contribution of at least 25% of the cost of service. This approach would have several advantages. It would cut down on waste, fraud, and abuse. It would ensure that everyone has a stake in the responsible stewardship of the program. It would help return Lifeline to its original purpose of discounted service rather than free service. It would end Lifeline's outlier status among universal service programs as the only one which offers free service. And it would be consistent with the commitment that virtually all of us publicly agreed to when Senator McCaskill asked us about a skin in the game requirement. Third reason, the document does not propose targeting limited Lifeline resources on closing the digital divide. The average annual household income of those eligible for Lifeline support is roughly $38,000. Numerous families with incomes at that level already subscribe to broadband. Under this proposal, therefore, the Commission could end up directing a huge amount of broadband subsidies to those who are already online. In my view, this is not efficient, productive, or fair. If we are going to refocus Lifeline on broadband, our goal should be on increasing broadband adoption. That is, helping Americans without internet access cross the digital divide, not supporting those who have already made the leap. On a related point, roughly 42 million households are currently eligible for the Lifeline program. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, that is 34% of all households in the United States. Notwithstanding the decline in economic fortune since 2009, that is too many. The federal government should not be subsidizing broadband service for 1/3 of the nation's households. If we are going to expand the program to include broadband, Lifeline should target our neediest citizens. Yet the Commission proposes nothing of the sort. Fourth reason, the item does not propose a real solution to the problem of Lifeline spending on tribal lands. As I noted earlier, the typical Lifeline subsidy is $9.29 per month, while those who live on tribal lands receive $34.25 per month, regardless of whether they are Native Americans. Now, to be clear, I have no problem with giving an enhanced subsidy to those who live on sparsely populated, remote tribal lands, where costs are high and communications infrastructure is lacking. But the current system yields absurd results. Again, Oklahoma is Exhibit A. It's become a magnet for those interested in perpetrating Lifeline fraud. Companies have taken advantage of excessive subsidies at ratepayers' expense. For instance, the owner of Icon Telecom was part of a scheme to defraud the Lifeline program out of more than $25 million. Specifically, he knowingly asked the FCC for funds for tens of thousands of phantom customers, many of whom received this larger tribal subsidy. And the number of customers the company fabricated was astounding. In September 2011, Icon reported having 2,200 customers in the program. Just over a year later, the number was more than 135,000. Luckily, the scheme was uncovered, and in early 2014, Icon's owner pleaded guilty to money laundering for transferring over $20 million from the company to his personal account. Now, today, the Commission should have proposed limiting the enhanced subsidy only to tribal lands that are sparsely populated. For instance, counties with less than 15 people per square mile. Limited resources should go only to high-cost tribal lands, not to cities that have advanced telecommunications infrastructure and are in the top 50 in the United States in population, like Tulsa. Instead, we merely seek comment on various ideas, a pretty good sign of where the Commission is not likely to go. Now, to be sure, there are some things in the plan that I do agree with. For example, we should require Lifeline providers to retain documents demonstrating that consumers are eligible to participate in the program. It's bad enough that providers internally make eligibility determinations in which they have an obvious self-interest. But it's especially troubling that providers do not, and in fact may not, retain that documentation to prove that customers who receive Lifeline support are in fact eligible for the program. And how is it possible to perform eligibility audits if Lifeline providers don't keep these documents? But despite some positive aspects to this part of the item, the Commission's main proposal would take us in the wrong direction. It would expand a broken program, it would waste even more money, it would raise taxes on the American people, and it would not target funding on those who really need the help. And for all of these reasons, I respectfully dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will start by saying that this is not the version of the statement that I wanted to read today. Sounds like you have a cough there. Can I get you some water? Sorry. This could and should have been a 5-0 vote. All 4 commissioners and the chairman had set forth their principles, planks, visions, or ideas well in advance of the circulation of this item. And as my colleague Commissioner Pai just highlighted, all 5 of us sat in a U.S. Senate hearing room and publicly committed to basic tenets of a modernized Lifeline program just a few months ago. Hammering out the details should have been a simple matter, particularly on a further notice of proposed rulemaking. Instead, it appears on yet another item, the thinking has evolved, and the desire to act in a bipartisan manner has evaporated. Sadly, I'm no longer surprised when this occurs. It is clear that the majority wants to spend as much as they possibly can without any hint of restraint before a possible change in administration. And they certainly want to do so before contribution reform, which has been put on ice until all the spending increases can be put into place and hang around long enough to acquire that certain patina of inevitability. Why else would the Joint Board be almost 3 months behind in producing a recommendation? It's simple. The majority has to spend the maximum before the Joint Board makes its one big move to obscure the shopping spree under the ideal of broadening the base, or as it's better known, taxing the Internet. Everyone knows there will not be a second bite at this apple. My position on Lifeline has not changed. Adequate controls and deterrents should be in place against waste, fraud, and abuse before considering a revamp of the program to include broadband. After all, the FCC is still grappling with the consequences of its previous expansion. But seeing where this proceeding was headed, I was willing to proceed on 2 tracks, evaluating the current program and adopting further safeguards while issuing a further notice on modernizing the program. In return, I expected that my 10 readily achievable principles would be included in the item. This is not unreasonable or unfounded expectation. I made clear to all those who would listen that the chief amongst my principles, my top priority would be to establish a cap for the Lifeline program. Since the Commission previously contemplated setting a budget in the 2012 order, and because the Chairman and at least 3 Commissioners publicly committed to adopting a cost cap for the program, this seemed like an easy lift. Specifically, I asked that we propose, number 1, a spending cap, or at the very least a firm budget, and 2, that we propose to set it at the current level, which is approximately $1.6 billion. This data-driven and fact-based amount seemed to be the most appropriate based on the reforms and experiences with the program. It is possible that the reforms contemplated in this item may lead to greater requests and demands than present spending. But I also expected that efforts to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse and to better target the support should limit any increases in program expenditures. Not wanting to foreclose the views of my colleagues and outside parties, I was even willing to contemplate what data or information the Commission would need to consider in order to select a different number. It is unfathomable to me that this very reasonable offer was rejected. And instead, my colleague highlighted a loophole that was talked about in the offer presented. I can only compare that to my wife setting a budget and then excluding shoes, food, and entertainment. That is not a budget. In addition to the experience with the Lifeline program, setting a firm budget at $1.6 billion seems more than adequate when compared to other programs. It would seem hard to justify spending as much on a consumer service discount as on funding actual network infrastructure by rate of return carriers that serve the most rural parts of the country, which is set at $2 billion, or by price cap carriers that serve almost all of the high-cost consumers that still lack broadband service, which is set at $1.8 billion. After all, without infrastructure in place, there's no broadband service, much less the possibility of a discounted broadband service. Moreover, I've heard time and time again that the Commission's strong preference is to include concrete proposals and tentative conclusions in order to generate better record. And as with any proposal, parties remain free to submit alternative viewpoints and data. Frankly, I would not have been surprised to see a proposed budget here only to see an attempt to increase it substantially against my wishes by the time we went to order. After all, the Commission was able to increase a previously adopted E-rate cap in the span of 5 months. This simple ask was rejected, even though every other universal service program lives within a cap or budget, and there's bipartisan support outside this building to impose one on Lifeline. See the many statements of the House members and senators with oversight responsibility of the FCC, including Senators McCaskill, Manchin, and Schatz. There is no good reason why this program should be any different from other USF programs. Contrary to the belief of some, this is not an entitlement program. Additionally, the FCC and courts have recognized that we have to balance USF spending against the burden on consumers and businesses that pay to support USF, lest the required contributions serve as a deterrent to adoption. Is there no realization that this funding comes directly out of the pockets of hard-working Americans, many of whom have suffered greatly under the current economy and get by under financially tenuous situations? The fact that a proposal for a firm budget was rejected is indicative of the current state of affairs of the Commission. Unless a majority of the Commission feels compelled, on occasion, to work with the other members to show that the Commission is still functioning, which is presumably how we got a languishing VoIP numbering item suddenly ended on today's agenda, there's little appetite for compromise. In addition to the budget, I made clear that I'm troubled by academic research cited by GAO, in its most recent Lifeline report, estimating that only 1 out of 8 subscribers and 1 out of 20 wireless subscribers wouldn't have had service absent the Lifeline subsidy. Those are failure rates of 88% and 95% respectively. Let me repeat, consumers are paying more on their phone bills each month to support service for people that would have signed up and paid in full without a subsidy. That is the very definition of an absurdly targeted program. My request to seek comment on this request was initially accepted, but later rejected. Ultimately, it did not even merit a footnote. There are other significant problems with the item that I hope to engage on, assuming the budget and targeting issues had been favorably resolved. I will touch on just a few. First, I do not support the view that so-called broadband internet access service is a telecommunications service, so I do not support the primary legal theory put forth in this item for funding broadband. It's completely flawed. I also do not support the use of Section 706. Second, there's still no requirement that Lifeline consumers pay a minimum contribution for the service. Many problems with the waste, fraud, and abuse in the program stem from the fact that when wireless service was added to the program, the subsidized voice service became free to end users, along with a phone and even data allowance. Setting a minimum contribution would deter problems and better align the current program with the original goal of providing discounted, not free, service, as in the statute. Although the further notice seeks comment on setting minimum performance standards that may have been in effect of requiring an end user to charge, there should be a default rule that, in no event, should the service be free to end users. Third, I'm aghast that the Commission would even consider opening the door to Link Up Round 2. The Commission in 2012 wisely discontinued the original Link Up program, which had become a source of significant waste, fraud, and abuse. I caution against traveling down this road again, and I understand the concern about whether broadband connection charge should serve as a barrier or could serve as a barrier to adoption. But the Lifeline program isn't intended to cover every conceivable cost and cannot do so within a reasonable budget. Fourth, I am concerned about tying eligibility to the SNAP program. Participation in SNAP program is highly variable, meaning that we could see large swings in program spending. In addition, adding Lifeline benefits directly to SNAP cards could raise new accountability concerns. Before tying eligibility to any particular program or set of programs, we need to better understand how these programs operate and interact with one another. Concerns have been raised, for example, about LIHEAP, where states have provided token LIHEAP benefits in order to qualify consumers for other programs. In addition, the item notes that recent changes to the National School Lunch Program enable schools to provide free lunch to all students if a certain percentage would have qualified by the old rules. If these programs continue to be qualifying programs for Lifeline, we need to better understand how these issues could impact Lifeline eligibility, and in addition, E-rate discounts in the case of the National School Lunch Program. Fifth, I continue to object to the delegation of substantial policy decisions to staff. In particular, the further notice contemplates delegating the responsibility of establishing and updating a mechanism that would set minimum service levels to ensure that Lifeline supports an evolving level of telecommunications service. While the Bureau is supposed to tie the levels to objective, publicly available data, I don't think that's much of a safeguard given our recent experience with the Commission's 2015 Broadband Progress Report, where the Commission contorted publicly available data to reach a predetermined outcome. Moreover, the statute is quite clear that the Commission shall establish the definitions of service supported by USF. 6. I continue to object to the practice of citing NALs as if they have precedential value. They do not. They are not final orders, and they are often challenged vociferously by the affected parties. I also find it incredible how quickly the Commission changed its mind on the utility of broadband access at public libraries. Less than a year after ramping up E-rate funding for libraries, specifically to ensure that students without internet access at home could get online, the Commission now blithely observes that library hours are limited, and even when they are open, they may not be able to fully accommodate the needs of their users. Can we get a refund on our new added money we're spending on libraries? I doubt it. Finally, I recognize that a couple of my comments are reflected in the item despite my dissent. In particular, I appreciate that staff honored the promise made to me before the item circulated to seek comment on making participation in the Lifeline program voluntary for providers. While some of my non-controversial points are reflected in this item, the true measure of any working relationship is what happens when there's disagreement. I offered compromise on my top priority and was met with rejection. And it happened so late in the process, there was no time to begin a conversation about my other serious concerns. In this regard, my low expectations for this item were met. I dissent.
You know, it's a shame. I agree with Commissioner O'Reilly that this should be a 5-0 vote. It's a shame the way that it seems to have become politicized. I want to again salute, recognize, thank Commissioner Clyburn, Commissioner Rosenworcel, who have always been leaders on this issue, and I'm proud to join with them today. One of the reasons that it's surprising that we have this kind of dissension up here is that both political parties now engaged in serious campaigning as to who's going to be responsible for the commission, or for the country and the commission in a few years. But both political parties are in violent agreement that our nation is challenged by income inequality, that there is a need for job growth, that there is a need for educational opportunities for our youths, and that the realization of the American dream needs to be manifest in an ever-changing digital economy. Everybody agrees on that. And thus it's disappointing when you try to begin a discussion about a program that would deliver on those kind of goals for which there is such universal agreement. And the comment has been made that here we all are up here talking about President Reagan and a program that he started and President Bush drastically expanded. That makes it even more disappointing. But I guess we should point out that all of the rules that we've heard complained about this morning, whether it be tribal lands or keeping records or having to have a database, this sort of thing, the absurdity of a targeted program, as it was called, all those rules were put in place by a previous commission majority. So let's look at what these votes today are against, what the dissenting votes are voting against. There clearly votes against recasting broadband or recasting Lifeline for the broadband era. At a time when America does business online, why should we continue to spend ratepayer funds only on 20th century narrowband service? Now, there's been a lot of talk today about hard-working Americans, and boy, we sure all identify with every dime that every hard-working American earns. But why shouldn't we expect better for those that contribute to this program? Why shouldn't we expect that their money will be going to solve modern problems? Why shouldn't ratepayers, those hardworking Americans, know that their support is going to go help students learn, veterans to apply for benefits, job seekers to apply for employment, and a myriad of other modern challenges that increasingly can only be met online? Those who dissent on this notice today are voting against cleaning up the invitation to waste, fraud, and abuse created by how the program was originally designed and managed. For the past 3 years, this agency has been trying to overcome inherited managerial problems. But that isn't enough. There are basic flaws in the rules that were enacted 15 years ago. And those flaws have invited the perpetuation of the kind of problems that we've heard called out today. You know, for instance, why should those who stand to receive the Lifeline funds be the ones determining who's eligible to participate? This isn't a conflict of interest. This is the fox guarding the henhouse. Those rules were written by a previous commission. Fixing those long-standing problems is the proposal that we vote on today, but for which we could not get a unanimous vote. No one is more outraged at some of the absurdities and some of the actions that have occurred in the marketplace by unscrupulous people, taking advantage of rules that were written by another commission that we're proposing to do something about. Now, all this discussion about a cap on the program, it's like a rhetorical snowstorm to distract from the problems that have long existed in the design of the management of this program. The facts in this regard are pretty straightforward. Because of decisions that were made when this program was expanded to wireless, the kind of expense increase that you saw on the screen a little while ago resulted. It was the result of decisions that were made previously. Chairman Janikowski came in and began to try to do something about it. Basic management issues, such as the absence of a database to check whether ineligible individuals were receiving benefits, should have been instituted at the outset. But they were ignored. That changed under the leadership of Chairman Janikowski and Chairwoman Clyburn, with the result that over $1 billion and ineligible recipients have been weeded out. Let's not be misled by the sudden interest in a cap, rather than focusing on fixing problems that began long ago. Today begins a proceeding to spend ratepayers' money more wisely, to deliver 21st century benefits to deserving recipients, and to get to the heart of the historic issues that have haunted this program's efficiency. I am befuddled at how this Republican-developed program has suddenly become so partisan. But I'm proud to cast my vote with the majority to reform and revitalize the Lifeline program. I'll call for the yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. The item is carried. The request for editorial privileges is granted with the objection noted. Thank you. Madam.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, the final item on your agenda will be presented by the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. It is entitled Rules and Regulations Implementing the Telephone Consumer Protection Act of 1991.
Thank you very much. And another first appearance sitting in the big chair. Allison Culler, we're happy and proud to welcome you as the new chief of CGB and welcome you to your first presentation before the commission, which I think is also your first commission meeting ever.
Correct.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, or good afternoon, and commissioners. Today I'm pleased to introduce an item that addresses 21 requests for the commission action on the topic of robocalls, which includes robotexts. Since the law that protects consumers against unwanted calls, the TCPA, was enacted in 1991, the Commission has consistently endeavored to protect consumers without inhibiting legitimate business interests. Communications. Despite these efforts, TCPA complaints as a whole are the largest category of consumer complaints we receive, and complaints regarding calls to wireless phone numbers are consistently one of the top consumer concerns. At the same time, petitions filed with the Commission raise questions about the TCPA's application to new technologies and about well-settled, long-standing Commission precedents. The declaratory ruling and order before you provides clarity on an array of issues that consumers and businesses care about most, including what calling equipment triggers the consumer consent requirement and whether consumers can revoke previous consent. And for the first time, the item would clear the path for carriers to offer call blocking technologies to consumers who want to take back control of their phones. The decision before you today faithfully carries out the spirit and letter of the TCPA, sends a clear message that consumers have the right to control the calls and texts that they receive, and recognizes the legitimate interests of the callers. Before turning the presentation over, I would like to thank the other bureaus and offices here at the Commission for their input and collaboration. The Office of General Counsel, the Enforcement Bureau, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Office of Strategic Planning, and the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. With me at the table are Kurt Schroeder, Chief of CGB's Consumer Policy Division, John Adams, the Deputy of the Division, and Christy Lemoyne, the Attorney Advisor, who will present the item.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA, was enacted in 1991 to address unwanted robocalls that invade consumer privacy and pose a risk to public safety. It requires a caller using an automatic telephone dialing system, also called an autodialer, an artificial voice or a pre-recorded voice to obtain prior express consent before making a non-emergency call to a wireless number or emergency lines, among other locations. The TCPA also requires prior express consent for telemarketing calls to residential telephone lines using an artificial or pre-recorded voice. If any of these calls are for telemarketing purposes, consent must be in writing. If not, the consent may be oral or written. The declaratory ruling and order before you resolves 19 petitions for declaratory ruling or exemption, 1 petition for rulemaking, and 1 letter containing a request for clarification. These filings raise several distinct questions. By resolving these questions, the Commission gives consumers more control over the calls they receive and provides callers clarity about the calls they may lawfully make. Specifically, the item clarifies that nothing in the Communications Act or the Commission's rules prohibit carriers or other service providers from implementing consumer-initiated call blocking technologies. As such, wireline and wireless carriers, as well as VoIP providers, are free to provide consumers with services and technologies to block unwanted robocalls. The item also clarifies that the TCPA requires the consent of the actual called party, the subscriber to a phone number, or the customary user of that number, not the intended recipient of the call. Callers will therefore have an incentive to use best practices, such as database checks or email confirmation, to ensure that they're actually calling the person who gave consent and not another person to whom the number has been reassigned. The item finds it reasonable, however, for the caller to have 1 opportunity to call a number to learn whether it has been reassigned before facing liability. The item addresses several other issues regarding consent. It clarifies that consumers who have previously consented to robocalls may revoke that consent at any time and through any reasonable means. That being on an acquaintance's wireless phone contact list is not consent to receive robocalls from providers of third-party applications downloaded by the acquaintance. That consent survives when a phone number is ported from wireline to wireless. And the pre-recorded call setup information provided by collect call services, including inmate call collect services, is not a separate robocall requiring consent. With regard to the TCPA rules that became effective in 2013, the item clarifies that a one-time, on-demand text sent in response to a consumer request do not require separate consent, and grants a limited waiver of the written consent rules so that petitioners may obtain updated consent from consumers who gave written consent under the previous rule. Further, the item affirms the Commission's past interpretations that if dialing equipment has the capacity, even with some modification, to dial random or sequential numbers, it is an auto dialer. As a result, consumer consent is required for voice calls and texts made with an auto dialer, even if the caller is not currently or presently dialing random or sequential phone numbers, but is instead calling a set list of numbers. The item also clarifies several of the TCPA's terms. It clarifies that the term capacity in the definition of auto dialer is not unbounded or so broad as to make any equipment that can dial a number an auto dialer. Addressing a question about who makes a call and is therefore responsible for that call under the TCPA, the item clarifies that an application provider that plays a minimal role in making a call, such as just providing the application itself but not the message content, is not the maker of the call for TCPA purposes. The item reiterates 2 prior Commission conclusions, that text messages are calls under the TCPA, making auto-dialed text messages subject to the consent requirement, just like any other robocall to a wireless number, and that consumers are equally protected from both telemarketing and informational calls to their wireless numbers if they don't want to receive those calls. The item also clarifies that an internet-to-phone text message, where an email is addressed to a wireless phone number and converted to a text message, is covered by the TCPA. Finally, the item grants exemptions from the TCPA's consumer consent requirement for time-sensitive financial alerts and healthcare-related calls that are free to the consumer. The exemptions are subject to strict conditions to protect consumer privacy, including a prohibition on telemarketing and debt collection content, and a requirement that each message provide a way to opt out of future messages. We recommend adoption of this item and request editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Clyburn.
Today, the Commission responds to 21 petitions by a number of companies and trade organizations for relief and clarification on compliance with the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. Robocalls or pre-recorded messages delivered by a computerized auto dialer, which are covered by the TCPA, are the subject of the highest number of complaints received at this Commission. Our record clearly demonstrates that just as many companies are aggressively using these auto dialers to reach consumers in a lawful manner. Consumer advocates, including members of the legislative branch, are, with equal vigor, expressing concerns about the persistence of high volumes of unwanted communications. I am pleased that this declaratory ruling makes clear that we will maintain the consumer protections the Act intended. I understand that many companies feel that this ruling does not go far enough in delineating exactly how far and within what guidelines a business may communicate with consumers using auto dialer technology. I believe, however, that by reaffirming our broad interpretation of the definition of an auto dialer and by affirming our commitment to congressional intent, we will further incentivize businesses to take the necessary steps to obtain prior consent when it comes to these communications. The Commission is striking a difficult but necessary balance in this item. Over the course of this proceeding, my office has received significant feedback from companies that are trying to reach consumers who gave prior consent to be contacted, but then that very same consent is effectively revoked when the person's number is reassigned. I am sympathetic to the challenges these companies face, since the absence of a comprehensive database of reassigned phone numbers may be an issue. I also appreciate how the Commission has attempted to provide some buffer for companies acting in good faith by allowing them one call post-reassignment in order to affirm any number reassigned. But I would like to see more. I am not going so far as to mandate, however, that any provider participate in the maintenance of a database of reassigned numbers. However, I would encourage voluntary participation by all providers in some type of comprehensive database for reassigned numbers. Another option suggested in the record that might have merit would be that carriers establish a minimum time period before reassigning numbers. Another issue raised is the limited free-to-end user call exemptions we provide here today in the cases of exigent notifications regarding financial services and healthcare matters. These exemptions ensure that consumers do not suffer dramatic harm to their personal or financial health and security because of the lack of access to timely alerts. Even so, I agree with commenters who are concerned that even these alerts could annoy consumers who have not provided prior consent, so I believe the required immediate opt-out mechanisms and the limited number of calls permitted balance the need for urgent information with the risk of intrusion. Finally, I believe that the decision to provide the clarity requested by 39 state attorneys general is a win. The Commission finds no legal barriers to carriers wishing to offer their customers access to consumer call blocking tools in this ruling, and providing consumers with tools that empower them to take control over the communications they receive is consistent with the intent of TCPA and is exactly the type of offering that we want to encourage carriers to provide. For those concerned that today's decision to affirm the broad application of TCPA may result in consumers losing access to valued communications, I simply say that we will remain vigilant. Consumers have not hesitated to express their concerns about receiving unwanted calls through our complaint process, and I have no doubt that they will do the same if access is unintentionally lost. I would like to thank the staff of the Consumer Government and Governmental Affairs Bureau, I haven't forgotten, for their hard work on this item, and particularly former Bureau Chief Chris Monteith. Your passion and commitment are evident in this particular item. I, of course, welcome our new Bureau Chief, Ms. Allison Cutler, to the team. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rosenworcel.
Picture this. A family sits down to the dinner table. It's more than an occasion to eat. It's a chance to tell tales of the day and reconnect in a busy world where the demands on our time can feel unrelenting. I know this scene well, because in my household, with 2 parents, 2 jobs, 2 kids, and too little time in the day, the dinner hour is sacred. But all too often, the bliss of this ritual is interrupted by Rachel from Card Member Services, by an announcement that we've been pre-approved for a cruise or a credit card, or by any number of other robocalls presenting us with information we did not ask for, do not want, and do not need. I detest robocalls. I'm not alone. Year in and year out, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act complaints are the largest single category of complaints that consumers lodge with us here at the Commission. We receive thousands of complaints a month about robocalls, and our friends across town at the Federal Trade Commission receive tens of thousands more, at one point receiving nearly 200,000 in a single month. Ugh. It's time, long past time, to do something about this. This is exactly why Congress passed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, which paved the way for the Do Not Call Act and registry. Like any law, these are not foolproof, but if we update our policies, we can not only give them modern meaning, we can help find new ways to honor our cherished right to be left alone. In some ways, we achieve this lofty goal today, but in others, I think we fall short. First, the good stuff. We bring clarity to the law and empower consumers with tools to avoid unwanted, harassing calls. Specifically, we make clear that nothing in the law prevents phone companies from deploying the latest technologies to block unwanted robocalls. We also make clear that consumers have the right to revoke any prior consent to receive robocalls. So when a consumer no longer wants to receive a company's robocalls, they have the unequivocal right to say stop. These efforts will help consumers manage robocalls, reduce unwanted intrusions, and bring a little more peace to the dinner hour. Next, the imperfect. Consumers have made clear, abundantly clear, they want fewer robocalls. So I do not understand why for some sectors of the economy this Commission gives the green light for more robocalls when consumers want a red one. The Telephone Consumer Protection Act is straightforward. It requires a company to get a consumer's prior express consent before making robocalls to their number. But today, we do away with this requirement for big banks, healthcare providers, and pharmaceutical companies. They get a loophole. This order couches this exemption in high-minded rhetoric about informing consumers about upcoming health care appointments and threats to their credit. But despite this rhetoric, the result is obvious. Consumers can expect to receive more robocalls from health care providers and banking institutions. Moreover, this puts the Commission in the ridiculous business of policing speech made in these calls and itemizing the number of calls permitted by these entities. The same results could be accomplished through private contract. Every one of us knows that. Every one of us signs countless forms to see a doctor or set up a bank account or arrange a loan. Giving our consent on these forms is not only sensible, it would get this agency out of the business of enumerating what calls can be made and what can be said on those calls. Because I think we need fewer robocalls and not more. On this aspect of today's decision, I dissent. Finally, I want to note that we have more work to do. Just last week, the Senate Special Committee on Aging held a hearing about robocalls and scams in which bad actors prey on consumers by faking or spoofing caller ID information. Call spoofing can be a pernicious tactic, confusing consumers who believe they are getting calls from a legitimate government agency or company when in fact it's a scammer on the other end of the line. We need to crack down on this predatory behavior, and if we lack the tools to do so, we need to revise our policies or seek help from Congress for ways to better protect consumers. In addition, we need to give serious consideration to how our robocall policies impact schools. To prevent truancy and create early warning for possible child abduction, many school districts call parents to alert them when students are not in class. But their efforts are getting caught in a web of lawsuits, and the Commission needs to take a hard look at how to fix this. I know this has been a rollicking effort and a contentious proceeding, but in many ways, today's efforts will bring a little more relief from commercial solicitation, a little more quiet in our homes, and a little more peace to the dinner hour. And to the extent it does, today's decision has my support. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. And the points that you made about school alerts and this sort of thing, very well taken. And as you know, we do want to get on with it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Commissioner Pai.
Congress passed the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or TCPA, to crack down on intrusive telemarketers and over-the-phone scam artists. The TCPA prohibits telemarketing in violation of our do not call rules, and it prohibits any person from making calls using the tools that telemarketers had at their disposal in 1991. And the TCPA includes a three-prong enforcement mechanism for remedying violations. States, the FCC, and individual consumers can each take illegal telemarketers to court, with statutory penalties starting at $500 per violation. Yet problems persist. Last year, the FCC received 96,288 complaints for violations of federal do not call rules, more than any other category of complaints. And just last week, as my colleague Commissioner Rosenworcel pointed out, the Senate Special Committee on Aging held a hearing on ending the epidemic of illegal telemarketing calls. At that hearing, the Attorney General of Missouri testified that the number one complaint of his constituents is illegal telemarketing. His office alone received more than 52,000 telemarketing complaints in 2014. And the Federal Trade Commission has reported that increasingly fraudsters, who often hide in other countries in an attempt to escape detection and punishment, make robocalls that harass and defraud customers. The FTC noted that a single scam artist made over 8 million deceptive robocalls to Americans. The bottom line is this: far too many Americans are receiving far too many fraudulent telemarketing calls. I know, because my family and I get them on our cell phones during the day and on our home phones at night. I have to say, parenthetically, though, that I cannot identify with the tableau that Commissioner Rosenworcel sets. In particular, given that I have highly mobile 3- and 1-year-olds, she lost me at "you sit down at the table." But seriously, this problem is, in fact, getting worse. And none of this should be news to the FCC. As I remarked in this very room back in January, unwanted telemarketing calls in violation of the National Do Not Call Registry are on the rise. In fact, such complaints made up almost 40% of consumer complaints in our latest report. And the number of complaints jumped dramatically last year from 19,303 in the first quarter to 34,425 in the third. Let's fix this problem. So fast forward 5 months. What has the Commission done since then to enforce its rules? It has issued a single citation to a single potential violator of federal do not call rules. Almost 100,000 complaints last year, one citation. That's not going to solve the problem. The courts haven't been better. The TCPA's private right of action and $500 statutory penalty could incentivize the plaintiff's bar to go after illegal telemarketers, the over-the-phone scam artists, and the foreign fraudsters. But trial lawyers have found legitimate domestic businesses a much more profitable target. As Adonis Hoffman, known to many in these halls, observed earlier this week in the Wall Street Journal, a trial lawyer can collect about $2.4 million per lawsuit by targeting American companies. So it's no surprise that the TCPA has become the poster child for lawsuit abuse, with the number of TCPA cases filed each year skyrocketing from 14 in 2008 to 1,908 in the first 9 months of 2014. Here's just one example. The Los Angeles Lakers offered its fans a fun opportunity. Send a text message to the team, and you might get to place a personalized message on the Jumbotron at the Staples Center. The Lakers acknowledged receipt of each text with a reply text, making clear that not every message would actually appear on the Jumbotron. The trial bar's response? A class action lawsuit claiming that every automated text response was a violation of the TCPA. Here's another case. Taxi Magic, a precursor to Uber, sent confirmatory text messages to customers who called for a cab. Each message indicated the cab's number and when the cab was dispatched to the customer's location. Did customers appreciate the service? I bet they did. But one plaintiff's attorney saw instead an opportunity to profit, and a class action lawsuit swiftly followed. Some lawyers go to ridiculous lengths to generate new TCPA business. They have asked family members, friends, and significant others to download calling, voicemail, and texting apps in order to sue the companies behind each app. Others have bought cheap prepaid wireless phones so they can sue any business that calls them by accident. One man in California even hired staff to log every wrong number call he received, to issue demand letters to purported violators, and to negotiate settlements. Only after he was the lead plaintiff in over 600 lawsuits did the courts finally agree that he was a vexatious litigant. Now, the common thread in each of these cases is that in practice, the TCPA has strayed beyond its original purpose. And the FCC has the power to fix that. We could be taking aggressive enforcement action against those who violate the federal do not call rules. We could be establishing a safe harbor so that carriers could block spoofed calls from overseas without fear of liability. And we could be shutting down the abusive lawsuits by closing the legal loopholes that unscrupulous trial lawyers have exploited to target illegitimate communications between businesses and consumers. Instead, the order takes the opposite tack. Rather than focus on the illegal telemarketing calls that consumers really care about and hate, the order twists the law's words even further to target useful communications between legitimate businesses and their customers. This order will make abuse of the TCPA much, much easier, and the primary beneficiaries will be trial lawyers, not American consumers. Although my written dissent will lay out my objections in more detail, I'll highlight just 3 of the ways that the order makes things worse. First, the order dramatically expands the TCPA's reach. Right now, the Act applies to what we call automatic dialing systems. Think clunky 19-eras machines that can automatically dial every 7-digit number. But after this order, each and every smartphone, tablet, VoIP phone, calling app, texting app, pretty much any phone that's not a rotary dial phone will be an automatic telephone dialing system. What does that mean in the real world? It means we're taking our focus off telemarketing fraud and sweeping all kinds of legitimate phone calls within the TCPA. Consider this example. Jim meets Jane at a party. The next day, he wants to follow up on their conversation and ask her out for lunch. He gets her cell phone number from a mutual friend and calls her from his smartphone. Pursuant to the order, Jim has just violated the TCPA, and Jane could sue him for $500 in statutory damages. If he follows up with a text message, that's another $500 violation. Second, the order opens the floodgates to more TCPA litigation against good faith actors. For example, there is no TCPA liability if a caller obtains the prior express consent of the called party. And accordingly, many businesses only call consumers who have given their prior express consent. The problem is that consumers often give up their phone numbers, which are then reassigned to other people. And when that happens, consumers don't preemptively contact every business to whom they have given their number. So even the most well-intentioned and well-informed business will sometimes call a number that's been reassigned to a new person. After all, over 37 million telephone numbers are reassigned each year. And no authoritative database, certainly not one overseen by the FCC, exists to track all the disconnected or reassigned telephone numbers, or to link all consumer names with their telephone numbers. The order makes the situation for good faith actors worse by imposing a strict liability standard. That is, even if a company has no reason to know that it's calling a wrong number, it'll be liable. This will certainly help trial lawyers update their business model for the digital age. Don't take my word for it. Just ask Rubio's, a West Coast restaurateur. Rubio's sends its quality assurance team text messages about food safety issues, such as possible foodborne illnesses, to better ensure the health and safety of Rubio's customers. When one Rubio's employee lost his phone, his wireless carrier reassigned his number to somebody else. Unaware of the reassignment, Rubio's kept sending texts to what it thought was its employee's phone number. The new subscriber never asked Rubio's to stop texting him, at least not until he sued Rubio's in court for nearly $500,000. Third, the order will actually make it harder to enforce our prohibitions on illegal advertising. That's because the order contains a special carve-out for the prison payphone industry. This dispensation lets that industry repeatedly make pre-recorded voice calls to consumers to set up a billing relationship to pay for future services. You might have no interest in receiving phone calls from those behind bars, but prison payphone providers will be able to robocall you anyway. This exemption opens the door to more actual robocalls, the same type of robotic calls that made Rachel from Cardholder Services infamous. Indeed, the rationale provided by the Commission to justify this decision provides a roadmap for those seeking a lawful way to avoid our telemarketing rules. I don't support creating such a loophole. In my view, apart from truly exigent circumstances, the FCC should not condone new robocalls to American consumers. Period. Now, there is, of course, much more to the order. Many of the decisions just reiterate well-known, subtle law that I support. Yes, the TCPA applies to text messages. Yes, consumers have the right to revoke prior express consent. And yes, a carrier may provide call blocking services with their customers' consent. None of these are surprising outcomes, but none advance the ball. As for the decisions that strike new ground, a few are good law. For instance, app providers won't face TCPA liability because they don't initiate calls placed by their users. But most of the decisions in this item just shift the burden of compliance away from telemarketers and onto legitimate businesses, sometimes in absurd ways. For instance, how could any retail business possibly comply with the requirement that consumers can revoke consent orally at an in-store bill payment location? Would they have to record and then review every single conversation between customers and employees? Would a harried cashier at McDonald's have to be trained in the nuances of consumer consent for TCPA purposes? The prospect makes one grimace. In all, the order is likely to leave the American consumer, not to mention legitimate American businesses, worse off. That's not something anyone should support, and for all of these reasons, I respectfully dissent.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Before I begin my formal statement, I thought I would discuss the process used to get to this point on TCPA. I recently ended a conference speech by sharing a core belief. All we really have in life is our good name given to us by our family and our word. After 14 months working on this issue, it is clear that the process brought out a new low I've never seen in politics or policy making, which is saying something. Along the way, some of us were led to believe that we were working together to find common resolution. Instead, we were being deceived in order to produce one of the most slanted documents I've ever seen. I will not be so naive to trust again certain people in leadership positions at the Commission. Today's order has been hailed as protecting Americans from harassing robocalls and texts. That is a farce. Instead, the order penalizes businesses and institutions acting in good faith to reach their customers using modern technologies. I'm sure it will be said that we're approving half of the petitions before us, but that's a completely misleading point because many of the petitions were filed due to the belief that the Commission would not do anything to properly address two big issues, reassigned numbers and auto dialers. I've made clear on multiple occasions that I do not condone abusive calling practices. In fact, I've been working for over a year in the hopes of advancing an item that would protect consumers from unwanted communications while enabling legitimate businesses to reach individuals that wish to be contacted. That's the balance that Congress struck when it enacted the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, TCPA, in 1991. Unfortunately, that balance has been turned on its head by prior FCC decisions that expanded the scope of TCPA and through litigation across the country that in many cases has further increased liability for good actors. Indeed, as my colleague has said, it has been reported that over 2,000 TCPA class action lawsuits were filed in 2014 alone. Far from protecting consumers, however, this current state of affairs, where companies must choose between potentially crushing damages under the TCPA or cease providing valuable communications specifically requested by consumers, contravenes Congress's intent for the statute not to interfere with normal, expected, and desired communications that consumers have expressly consented to receive. These include alerts from a school that a child did not arrive at school or that the building is on lockdown, product recall and safety notifications, notifications of utility outages, immunization reminders for unserved or low-income populations, tweets and other social media updates and instant message notifications received by text, updates from airlines to let their consumers know that their flight has been delayed. Moreover, this is despite the evidence in the record of the benefits of informational calls and texts. Indeed, other federal agencies, including the Department of Health and Human Services, have been promoting text messages as a way to benefit Americans. Some agencies even require companies to make certain number of calls to consumers. Additionally, companies may be obligated under state law to contact their consumers. The record also shows that these types of services are popular with consumers as long as they provide timely and relevant information. Supporting examples are provided in my complete written statement. The Commission's unfathomable action today further expands the scope of TCPA and sweeps in a variety of communications, either by denying relief outright or by penalizing companies that dial a number that, unbeknownst to them, has been reassigned to someone else. Indeed, the order paints companies from virtually every sector of the economy as bad actors, even when they are acting in good faith to reach their customers. Incredibly, it even concludes that consumers experience a real harm and a cognizable harm, an intrusion of privacy, by receiving as few as 2 stray calls or texts. To be sure, the FCC narrowly selects calls and texts it thinks consumers should receive and allows them under very limited circumstances. I approve the relief provided to the extent it is granted, but caution that it may not be helpful as some would claim. I'm not even sure it's workable. Otherwise, the decision today will make it much harder for consumers to receive information that they want and need, and will discourage companies from pursuing services that customers may find beneficial. Therefore, I strongly dissent from the remainder of the order. Starting with the threshold issue, I disagree with the premise that TCPA applies to text messages, my colleague had said. The TCPA was enacted in 1991, before the first text message was ever sent. The Commission should have gone back to Congress for clear guidance on this issue, rather than shoehorn a broken regime on a completely different technology. The order also impermissibly expands the statutory definition of an automatic telephone dialing system, or known as an auto dialer, or ATDS, far beyond what the TCPA contemplated. First, the TCPA defines an auto dialer as equipment that has the capacity to perform specific functions. Therefore, it seems obvious that the equipment must have the capacity to function as an auto dialer when the call is made, not at some undefined future point in time. Moreover, the TCPA bars companies from using auto dialers to make any call subject to certain exceptions. This indicates that the equipment must, in fact, be used as an auto dialer to make the calls. Not so, according to the order. Equipment that could conceivably function as an auto dialer in the future counts as an auto dialer today. Indeed, the new definition is so expansive that the FCC has to use a rotary phone as an example of technology that would not be covered because the modifications needed to make it an auto dialer would be too extensive. That is like the FAA regulating vehicles because with enough modifications, cars and trucks could fly, and then using an example of a skateboard of a vehicle that does not meet that definition. Second, the order misreads the statute by including equipment that merely has the capacity to dial from a list of numbers. That's not what the TCPA says. Third, the Commission previously clarified to be considered automatic, an auto dialer must function without human intervention. Therefore, it should be clear that non-de minimis human intervention would disqualify it from being an auto dialer. Fourth, the distinction drawn between different types of apps is without merit. While it is true that different apps may require different levels of engagement by the user before sending messages to the user's contacts, no messages would be sent at all but for the user signing up for the service. Turning to reassigned numbers. Every day, an estimated 100,000 cell phone numbers are recycled to new users. As a result, numerous companies acting in good faith to contact customers who have consented to receive calls or texts are exposed to liability when it turns out that numbers have been reassigned without their knowledge. Today's order offers companies fake relief instead of a solution, one free pass. That is, if a company makes a single call or text to a number that has been reassigned, the company will not be liable for that single contact. If the call is made to a wrong number, misdialed, there's no free pass at all. Indeed, we may have provided a new way for consumers acting in bad faith to entrap legitimate companies. A person could take a call, never let on that it's the wrong person, and receive subsequent calls solely to trip the liability trap. The idea that after one call, a caller would have the constructive knowledge that a number has been reassigned, even if there was no response, is absolutely ludicrous. The FCC expects callers to divine from mere silence the current status of a telephone number. Think about this in the context of Twitter, which consumers can set to text if anything happens involving them. Before Twitter can even realize the number has been reassigned, they are already liable for hundreds or perhaps thousands of violations. The only solution is to stop the practice entirely. The FCC points to a list of suggestions in the record to help callers determine whether a number has been reassigned, such as checking a number database. But then the item does not provide any relief or a safe harbor for doing so. Moreover, some of the alternatives that the FCC suggests go so far as to be anti-consumer. For example, the FCC notes that companies could require consumers who give consent to notify those companies when they relinquish their numbers. If they do not, the FCC observes that the caller may wish to seek legal remedies for violations of the agreement. In other words, the FCC thinks it's reasonable to have companies sue their own customers. Sadly, there were reasonable options that the Commission rejected. In particular, a number of petitioners and commenters asked the FCC to interpret called party to mean intended recipient. This common-sense approach would have allowed a company to reasonably rely on consent obtained for a particular number. The order also decides that TCPA includes a right to revoke consent to receive non-telemarketing calls. But this right appears nowhere in the statute. Instead, the order turns to common law tort principles to read in the statute a right to revoke consent. Talk about bureaucratic activism. As a longtime congressional staffer, I was stunned by this analysis. Usually we start with the premise that a statute says what it means and means what it says. If Congress did not address an issue, then the FCC should not presume to act in its stead. I certainly do not understand why the FCC would resort to common law principles before turning to Congress for guidance or request a statutory fix. Clearly, this is an area where Congress has been active, not just on TCPA generally, but also on the very issue of revocation of consent. The order does grant slight relief in a few limited circumstances and very narrowly, namely to enable consumers to receive fraud alerts, data breach information, medical appointment and refill reminders, hospital registration and discharge information, and home health care instructions. I support the relief to the extent it is provided, but would have gone further. Everyone will soon know that even the relief granted is limited and potentially unworkable. In sum, I am beyond incredibly disappointed in the outcome today. It will lead to more litigation and burdens on legitimate businesses without actually protecting consumers from abusive robocalls made by bad actors. I dissent in part and approve in part for the reasons already discussed.
Thank you, Commissioner. As we've heard multiple times today, robocalls are the number one complaint that the FCC receives from American consumers. Last year, that number was about 215,000 individuals who took time to write us asking we do something about the annoyance of robocalls. I'm with them. This is a bipartisan issue. Surprise. 39 state attorneys general of both parties have written us saying, will you please do the kinds of things that we're doing today? And why are these rulings necessary? Because technology has outpaced the implementation of the Telephone Consumer Protection Act. When the act was passed in 1991, live people were making cold calls. Today, those calls are made by machines. And that technology has made it cheaper. And as a result, there's been an explosion in the number of calls. An explosion which has been aided by exploiting the wording of our rules to claim a loophole for automatic equipment. Clever lawyers have fed the explosion in robocalls by claiming that if the company substitutes software for hardware to drive the calls and or doesn't call from a list, that they are exempt from our rules. Today we do what Congress gave us the authority to do, and that is to keep the enforcement of the law up to date with technology, such as text messages, such as automated equipment. Because the loophole that has been exploited heretofore, because we haven't, has fed the expansion of robocalls. It's now closed. Now, make no mistake about it. There are appropriate applications for automatic calling technology, like when the consumer has granted permission or asked to be notified. There's sensible exceptions, as like when the package delivery company notifies you that a package is coming your way when you didn't give permission because you didn't know there was a package. Similarly, your bank should be able to call you about a fraud concern, your doctor about a health emergency. But these legitimate purposes should not be a smokescreen that allows the opening of the door to unwanted calls. There's a simple concept in the statute that we embrace today. You cannot be called unless you consent to be called. The consumer should be in control. Now, the first way that consumers can accomplish this is to tell their phone company to block calls from robocall numbers. The phone companies have resisted doing this because they said the FCC wouldn't allow them to do so. Well, today that issue is cleared up. Phone companies, please start letting your consumers request to have robocalls blocked. We're also instituting a one-strike rule to deal with the way in which mobile phone numbers are frequently reassigned. The new user of a reassigned phone number shouldn't have to put up with being abused by callers for the old user of the phone number. And let me give you an example. We heard from one consumer in that flood of comments that we hear from America. One consumer told us that their phone number, their new phone number, was inundated with 27,809 unsolicited text messages over 17 months, despite repeated requests to stop. That is 27,808 too many annoyances. And it stops today. Now, we've heard a lot about class action lawsuits. If there is a problem in this regard, the proper forum for resolution is the Congress, not the FCC. The Congress explicitly gave consumers a private right of action to sue for those who violate TCPA. I'm amazed that some of my colleagues who usually advocate strict adherence to the statute somehow find flexibility in the law to allow us latitude to favor robocallers over consumers, and to do so in the name of stopping lawsuits expressly authorized by Congress. Congress told us to shut down unwanted calls. Their instructions, including the instructions to keep up with technology, were unambiguous. We will not turn our back on 215,000 Americans who were frustrated enough that they turned to us for help. Listening to Congress and the American people, the message is clear. No unauthorized, automated calls. Stop it, and stop it today. I'll now call for the yeas and nays. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The ayes have it. Are you looking at me, Commissioner? Or?
Yeah, I'm looking at you, but don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. Okay. The ayes have it. The item is adopted, and the request for editorial privileges are granted with the objection noted. Would any of my colleagues like to make any announcements at this time, Commissioner?
Yes. Thank you. It's that time of year again, Mr. Chairman and colleagues. Oh, no, he can't sing, obviously. I have three law clerks that I would like to introduce to those of you who haven't met them. Evan Scott is a 3L, originally from Chicago, Illinois. He's at Marquette University. Don't be shy. He has interest in intellectual property, communications law, and policy, and I think he likes food trucks, but I'll get to know him a little better. Sarah Papadilias is a 4-year joint degree student pursuing her master's in mass comm and a law degree at the University of Florida. This is her second summer at the FCC, if she looks a little familiar to you. And Misha Gutentag is a rising 2L at Yale Law School. Before he attended into law school, he spent 4 years teaching high school chemistry in Teach for America in Houston, Texas. And he wanted me to let you know that he only set off the school fire alarm 3 times, so we might be relatively safe here at the FCC. I would like to welcome my trio to the agency, and thank you very much. And I hate to begin and end on a sad note, but Mr. Chair, and I'm sure a lot of us are aware that a former member of our FCC family unexpectedly passed away last week. Joseph Soban worked on a national broadband plan and deployment costs and cost models that help us to develop the tools that we needed for the Connect America Fund. He was just shy of his 35th birthday. He was funny, smart, and dedicated. He leaves behind his wife, Jessica Stott Soban, another national broadband plan alum. They had 2 young children, Abigail at 3 and Joseph the 4th at 16 months, and they have another child due in September. The funeral was this morning at 10:30 in Cambridge, but I just wanted to lift him up and his family up in our thoughts and prayers, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Rosenworcel.
Right now, at this time, in Maryland, there is a moving truck backing up to the house of Priscilla Delgado Ardris. So she's not here. Given the hassle associated with moving, I'm sure she wishes she was. But Priscilla has been a trusted advisor who has been by my side since my earliest days in this office. Not only that, she has been with me on the smallest of small planes flying above the Arctic Circle. She has been with me through some ugly bouts of food poisoning abroad. She has been with me hurling in a car across the California desert with a light so bright it's impossible to see the road. And she's been with me in a police car surrounded by rifles and ammunition. So it's a little wild working with me, apparently, but it's not just that. She has been a fantastic public servant, policy whiz, and an eagle-eyed lawyer It's been a treat to have her in my office, and I don't think I'm the only one who's benefited. I think the work here at the Commission has benefited as well. She does it all with a terrific mix of discipline, eloquence, and grace. And I'm so proud to have worked with her. I am even more grateful to be able to call her a friend. So I wish her well as she and her family move to North Carolina, and I believe the Tar Heel State is awfully lucky to have her, because wherever Priscilla goes and whatever she does, I know she is going to do great things.
Hear, hear. Mr. Pye, you got anything?
Just a few personnel announcements, outgoing and incoming. In terms of outgoing, Tom Klein of the Office of Inspector General is leaving. Tom spent 37 years in federal service. That's just incredible dedication to the public interest. Most recently, he's been in the Office of Inspector General, and he's leaving the FCC, leaving Washington, in fact, to become the new Inspector General for the city of Jacksonville, Florida. And when I heard about this, I emailed him. I said, look, I hope you have some great weather down there and that the Jaguars give you something fun to watch. And he said, well, looking forward to the first and hope springs eternal in the second. So well said, Tom. We really appreciate everything you've given to this agency. In terms of incoming, last month I introduced two of our new summer clerks, and I'd like today to introduce our third, who is Christine Beeler, who joined our office the week after our meeting last month. According to her, we have saved the best for last. So congratulations, Christine. Christine's a rising 3L at Georgetown, where she's the managing editor of the Georgetown Immigration Law Journal. She grew up in Philadelphia and received her undergraduate degree with honors from Roanoke College, where she majored in poli-sci and international relations. Christine's no stranger to working in the federal government. She spent last summer working for the House Judiciary Committee on the Regulatory Reform, Commercial and Antitrust Law Subcommittee. And this past fall, she worked for the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, where she spent her time assisting with the investigations of federal agencies. Christine's job performance has been great so far. She did a fantastic job working on the VoIP numbering item, and she is the reigning trivia champion among our clerks. On the other hand, she did lose her ID badge, and she speculated that Paul McCarthy was one of the four Beatles. These kids these days, that's really.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, just
what are you do?
No, but in all seriousness, so really pleased that Christine has joined our office and look forward to working with her this summer. I also want to take just a brief second to welcome all the other interns to the agency. We might not have a chance to give each of them a shout out personally, but I personally had a chance to meet with three of them this past Tuesday: McCara Casey, Jim Wintering, and Brittany Zacco. And it's just great to see this infusion of young talent who are passionate about the issues, interested in working at a place like the FCC. Their enthusiasm, their aptitude is something that, frankly, just invigorates me, I dare say all of us. And we welcome you all here and hope you have a fantastic summer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. O'Reilly? So I want to I have a long list of folks here. I'd like to lead off with calling everybody's attention that tomorrow we're going to say farewell to one of the most universally beloved and admired members of the FCC family, Mary Beth McCarrick. She started out as a temp in Chairman Hunt's office and has served as public affairs specialist in multiple roles throughout this agency, making friends, earning admirers along the way. We all know Mary Beth is incredibly modest and quiet and gets embarrassed to be on screen. And recognizing her modesty, I'm sure that shot made her very uncomfortable. But Mary Beth, thank you for your contributions and all that you have done for this agency. You'll leave a lot of friends behind. And as people go, so people come. We've already shouted out Allison for her arrival today. Thank you very much. Allison brings extensive experience in both public service and the private sector of the Commission. Most recently, she was the Senior Vice President at Visa. And somehow we were able to convince her to leave California and come to balmy, never muggy Washington, D.C. But we're grateful that you're here, Allison. And I'm grateful that Over against the back wall is Jessica Almond, who is the acting legal advisor in the office of the chairman, because one of these days, in the not-too-distant future, we'll be at one of these sessions saying goodbye to Renee Gregory. And Jessica has stepped in to fill that role when Renee moves on. The best part is that we're welcoming Jessica back to the commission. She's had numerous positions here at the agency over the years, and I'm just lucky enough that she's now in the chairman's office. One of the other things in the chairman's office, and I call this out in particular for one of my colleagues, one of the other things that you'll notice in the chairman's office is a pennant pinned to one of the carrels or one of the cubicles representing the national championship football team, the Ohio State University. And that particular cube belongs to Matt Diaz. Matt, where are you? Stand up. Oh, over here. All right, okay. From the Ohio State Moritz College of Law, where he is an active member in the Hispanic legal community in Columbus, and was recently recognized for his leadership as a first-year law student by earning the Michael Moritz Leadership Award in Law. Understand, it's the Moritz School, it's the Moritz Award. That's a big-time award from that school. Before beginning law school, Matt worked at the University of South Florida's Office of Government Relations, working at the state level to advocate in behalf of higher education policy. He's got a dual bachelor in philosophy and political science from the University of South Florida, where he was student body president. No small task. Matt, we're glad to have you with us and to join Crystal Evans. Now, is Crystal, where's Crystal? Oh, you are sitting next to him. Okay, there's Crystal. Crystal is a third-year law student at American University, the Washington College of Law. She received a degree in communications. Now, I want you to know this is not true. I'm looking at this, and somebody wrote on here, and I got a feeling it's probably Crystal. She received a degree in communications from the, capitalized, the University of Miami. No, there's only one the. From University of Miami in 2010, and before coming to the FCC, she interned for the Internet Association, mainly working on copyright, digital trade, and mobile payment issues, but was also a judicial intern in the Eastern District of Virginia. She's on the Administrative Law Review and holds board positions on Americans Intellectual Property Brief and Communications and Media Law Society. We're really grateful to have Crystal with us. And then joining is the bearded one, Chris Laughlin, who is part of the Phil Weiser rotating clerk program at the FCC. He's a third year at the University of Colorado School of Law. While in law school, he has worked in the public policy shop at Comcast and for his school's tech law and policy clinic, which was where I first met Chris when we were out there for last year's conference, and he was saddled with driving me around, and now he's stuck with me again. Chris is also on the executive board of the Colorado Technology Law Journal, and his article regarding cybersecurity and critical infrastructure sections were selected for publication in the journal. He's been active in the Colorado political community, and for many years also worked for several years before law school, including for the state of Colorado. I'm grateful, all of us in the chairman's office are grateful that these three have joined us, and I want to also associate myself with Commissioner Pai's observation about the 65 other. We have 68 interns here this summer. We are really glad you're here. We want to see more of you individually in the process. And we hope that you make the most. I had a meeting the other day literally talking about what we were going to do for our intern program this year. It's more than Food Truck Friday, folks. We'll be bringing some folks in. We'll be making sure that you get to meet the commissioners and key bureau chiefs and this sort of thing to do as much as we can to not only be a place of good fellowship, but also continuing of your learning experience. So we're really grateful that you are all here. If we have no other things from the bench, we will turn to Madam Secretary to tell us what happens next.
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, July 16th, 2015.
Till then, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Chiefs will get started with the press conference. Conversations not related to the press conference, if you could move them out into the hallway, that would be fantastic so we can get started. Thank you. Chairman Wheeler has a few words, and then we'll take your questions.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all. Happy June. A couple of brief comments about some of the things that happened today before. Oh, how about this? No, actually, you know, it's just that I'm so shy and I don't raise my voice, you know. Been a couple of comments about things that happened today and the significance for U.S. consumers. We voted to launch a major overhaul, a modernization of the Lifeline program that accomplishes two things, and it's important to recognize that there are two key things being done here. One, it further cleans up the invitation to waste, fraud, and abuse that has haunted the program in the past. And secondly, it refocuses the program on 21st century challenges rather than 20th century issues. I mean, we all know broadband has gone from being a luxury to a necessity in today's world. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of Americans earning less than $25,000 a year don't have wired broadband at home. And with a statutory mandate to ensure that low-income consumers have access to advanced communications services, revamping the Lifeline program from narrowband to broadband and asking comments on how that should be done is an essential, required, no-brainer undertaking. We also build on earlier reforms initiated by Chairman Janikowski to tackle the runaway spending problem that was created under decisions made by previous commissions. Reforms that have already reduced annual Lifeline spending by over $1 billion over the last several years. Collectively, these efforts to rebuild Lifeline will make the program better for those who contribute and those who participate. I want to emphasize that. We're looking at how do we revitalize the Lifeline program for both of those sets of constituencies involved in it. Those who contribute ought to get their money's worth. Those who benefit need to be in the 21st century. Today we're also cracking down on the number one complaint that the FCC receives from American consumers, and that's robocalls. As I said in my statement, last year more than 215,000 individuals took the time to reach out to us to write the commission and ask us to do something about the annoyance of robocalls. It is a bipartisan issue. 39 state attorneys general of both parties have asked us to do the kind of thing that we did today. We heard from them, and we took action. We're going to do what Congress gave us the authority to do, to modify the enforcement to keep up to date with technology. Specifically, as I said in my statement, specifically what we're doing is we're closing the loophole that clever lawyers had seized upon to allow the expansion of robocalls using a technology that wasn't envisioned in the 1991 Act. But fortunately, the Congress was wise enough at that point in time to say, we expect the FCC will keep up with changes in technology and deliver on the commitment that the consumer has a right not to be bothered unless they consent. That's what we did today. We've embraced the concept that the consumer should be in control. And we've made it easier for consumers to turn to their phone company and say, please stop my robocalls. So the message is clear. We've listened to both Congress and the American public on the question of robocalls. Both say they don't want them. And today, we said, we agree. We're on your side. So I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. Lynn, start with you.
Now that the open internet rules have taken effect, are there, in general, not asking you to name a specific company, but are there in general broadband ISP practices that you think the Commission should look into to decide or consider whether there may be a violation of these new rules that are now in place?
Thanks, Lynn. That's a really good question. So I've tried to be specific in talking about how we would implement the open internet rules and describe it as a referee on the field. And let me see if I can continue the metaphor a little bit more. It's not the referee who should be creating the first downs. Okay? The players should play for that. The players should earn that. We expect that the players, in this case the companies, will work between and among themselves to resolve any problems, to resolve disputes. That our role is to stand there as the referee and to throw the flag when the rules get violated, when something is clearly untoward. And I think that we have seen already in interconnection agreements, for instance, how just the fact that the FCC is on the field has allowed the players to come together and find mutually agreeable solutions. And I think that's a good precedent for the kinds of things that we hope come. Brendan.
Hey, Chairman. I'm wondering, there were some reports about a month ago that you had called these executives from different cable companies to tell them that you don't oppose all mergers in the industry. Why did you do that?
Oh, this was so. There had been a statement made by Rob Marcus at an investor conference, saying, "I don't understand the FCC's decision." And I called him to say, "Well, excuse me, Your lawyers were in the room when we explained that to Comcast. What is it you don't understand? Let me lay out what was going on there. And then after that, I said, oh my golly, there's all this talk going on. I guess I'd better talk to Tom Rutledge just so there's somebody doesn't say, well, I'm spinning one way or another. And that was what the calls were. Paul.
Mr. Chairman, the FCC last week won in the D.C. Circuit in the challenge to the incentive auction rules. There's some speculation, though, that some of the other items you were considering, including a vacant channel item that you recently adopted at NPRM, if you adopt rules in that proceeding or perhaps some other related auction proceedings, you could get challenged again and perhaps it could delay the auction. I just wanted to, get your reaction to that observation that it could still get delayed for court appeals.
Oh, I think one of the realities of this job is the fact that there's always the potential for lawsuits. But I think that we are on course and speed for a first quarter 2016 auction, and we will continue to manage this agency to that goal. Yep.
There's been a lot of criticism of the TCPA from places like the U.S. Chamber, and they feel that the rules that you circulated were kind of anti-business. And you already addressed the issue about all these lawsuits that seem to keep cropping up. But I've also heard that potentially the rules could have a bit of a chilling effect. It would make companies think twice before sending what could be some necessary text messages. I mean, are you going to be sort of monitoring this to see if there's unintended consequences down the road, as you move forward on these rules?
Of course. Elena.
Lydia, thank you.
Lydia, jeez, sorry.
That's all right. In light of yesterday's record proposed fine against AT&T, how do you feel about a draft bill from the Senate Commerce Committee that would change some of the Enforcement Division's procedures and also allow companies to appeal enforcement fines before having to pay them?
I haven't seen it. I didn't know. Who's introducing a bill like this?
It's a draft bill from the Senate Commerce Committee.
Who's proposing it?
I don't want to.
I haven't. Hey, I'm getting a piece of news, from the news source. Let's talk about that, about the AT&T NAL that we issued yesterday. First of all, let's understand the process. We issue a notice of apparent liability, which is a commission vote. And then AT&T comes in and says, well, here's our response. Here are the facts that we think that you should know. And then we arrive at a final decision based on what that record is. I think the second thing that we ought to look at in this context is also making sure that we understand the issues. The 2010 Open Internet Order transparency rules were explicit that there had to be sufficient explanation. That's the term that's used. Sufficient explanation of carrier activities for consumers. In this particular instance, the term unlimited, saying to consumers, we're going to give you unlimited data. The term unlimited wasn't unlimited. Question. Is using that term sufficient explanation? Don't think so. Who it applied to, who this policy applied to, wasn't explained. They said that it applies to the top 5% of subscribers, data subscribers. How am I supposed to know if I'm in the top 5%? How is that a sufficient explanation? there was no notice as to what this slowdown would be. What can I expect in reduction? There was no explanation of what the impact of that would be on the way I use what I thought I had bought. Yet they continue to use this term unlimited. And they even went so far as to have focus groups to help them with their spin. And the focus groups came back and said, no, if it's unlimited, we don't want you to cut it back. But based on using those focus groups for their spin, they did not provide what the rule says you have to do, and that is to provide sufficient explanation for what you're doing. That's why we acted.
With Reuters, is it true that you believe there to be red flags in the DISH application for in DISH's partners' applications for designated entity discounts?
I don't know what a red flag is. What I do know is that we are reviewing the designated entity as we've proposal, suggestion, the action of DISH, and we'll be making a decision based upon the record that has been developed in that review. Gotham.
Hi, Gautam Nagesh, Wall Street Journal. Chairman, last year at this time, you were the target of a lot of criticism, and some of it was very personal. I wasn't there in February, but I heard the crowd here was very receptive and positive. What is it like for the public reaction to to you personally and your policies to shift so dramatically in a year? And do you think it'll have any impact on how you conduct yourself for the rest of your tenure?
Oh, wow. Gotham, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. We're going to keep doing what we think is the right way of doing things based on the record that's developed. And, sometimes people are happy, sometimes they're not. The question is, when you get up in the morning and you look yourself in the mirror, are you happy? I don't mean you. I wasn't pointing at you.
So far.
David. Yeah, David.
Hi there, Chairman.
Hey, David.
Will the FCC vote in July on the DirecTV AT&T deal?
We are trying to resolve that with dispatch, and I don't want to get as specific as you said, but I hope that we will resolve it with dispatch.
Is that a leaning towards yes?
Brian.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. The number one response that I've gotten from readers on the AT&T fine is, am I going to get some kind of refund?
Yeah.
Should AT&T provide refunds for its customers affected by the unlimited data throttling? And why didn't the FCC propose that in its fine?
Yeah, right, because right now our authority is to levy a fine for this kind of a thing. As I laid out, we're walking through a process here that will now have AT&T putting their position forward and the commission making a decision, and that could end up in a part of a settlement. As you know, we in other things we have been saying, how do we get money back to consumers? But I think it's premature at this point in time to make kind of
But do you believe that AT&T should offer refunds?
Should offer refunds proactively or in a settlement with us? I'm not sure what the question is.
In a settlement with you.
I think it is something that we have been doing in other situations. It is not at this point in the NAL. It is a possibility that it could evolve, but this is a process that now has to run its own course.
Thank you. I was wondering if you had any reaction to Commissioner O'Reilly's comments that he essentially felt misled during the discussions of the robocall order, and were you concerned by those comments? Are you fine with those comments? I mean, what was your reaction to that?
Oh, I'm always concerned that if there are people that have worries about our interrelationships, I'm comfortable. I remember sitting on his couch and saying, "This is where we're going in robocalls." I'm sorry that he feels that way. I do believe strongly, however, in the healing aspects of dialogue, and I intend to engage in that.
Hi, Chairman. Amanda Cost with Scripps News here. You mentioned that telephone companies should provide tools or solutions to help consumers block these robocalls. At what cost? Will there be any limits on actually getting these in place so that consumers can control the calls and texts? And secondly, how soon can consumers actually expect to experience real relief from robocalls?
So first of all, we gave consumers a lot of tools today, so they can start today doing these kinds of things in a self-advocacy point of view. And there are multiple options that they've got. Yes, call the telephone company and say, "I want calls from robocalling numbers blocked to me." And the issue there hasn't been an issue of cost. The issue there has been an issue of the carriers saying, "Well, we're not sure the FCC would allow us to block." Well, we solved that. We solved that problem. Secondly, they can get on the do not call list of the FTC, and I hope they do. Thirdly, they can simply say, "I don't want to be called. Hello, I don't want to be called." Or, as you heard in one of the dissents, they can go into a kiosk in the store and say, "I don't want you calling me," and other ways of communicating. Send them an email. Send them, there's all kinds of ways of saying, "No, I don't want to." And lastly, there are actually the FTC ran a contest on apps that you can use to block calls. And those apps, this kind of takes us back to the first point, those apps don't work yet until today on all phone networks, because the carriers have been concerned about them. But now that carrier concern is removed, and so that app ought to be. So there's a list of things that consumers have been empowered to do today to stop robocalls. Todd.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Todd Shields, Bloomberg News. What is your decision, or the proposed decision, regards a reserve for the incentive auction? Are you going to accept or reject T-Mobile's petition for reconsideration? Thank you.
Well, as you know, we're going to come out next week with the package of all the things, and I'll be meeting with all the groups. But let me address one specific thing, Todd. It is important for competition in wireless that in the incentive auction there be a reserve for those carriers who do not have the assets necessary to compete fully, and who might be precluded from accessing those assets by their competitors. That, in and of itself, is a revolutionary decision that this commission has already made. The question then becomes, how big is that? Some people want more, some people want less. It's no surprise. As I said in the blog yesterday, I've even been known in the past, in my previous life, for coming in and saying, "Oh, I've got to have more, I've got to have more." But the important thing is that it exists, that there exists for the first time a set-aside, a reserve to make sure that there is the capacity for equality of competition among wireless carriers. That's the key point. Brooks.
In the robocall decision, there was a carve-out for health care providers and financial institutions. Why not a carve-out for political calls?
Golly. Hello. You have just been defrauded in your bank account is a little different from, hello, tell me who you're going to vote for. Or, hello, let me do a push poll is a little different from, hello, you have a health emergency.
You're not worried about the effect on the body politic?
Oh, nicely done. Nicely. Do you want to follow that? I mean, really, is that it has to be just kind of lower the level of discussion here. Huh?
There's really no comeback to that. But what do you say to businesses that have raised concerns that the robocall order means that they won't be able to provide their customers with legitimate and important information that they think that they need?
Legitimate businesses seeking to provide legitimate information will not have difficulties. As Commissioner Rosenworcel pointed out, the consent forms that we sign to get service from our doctor, our bank, our whomever, provide that kind of protection. And what we're going after here, and let's just be really clear, okay? When this law was passed, it was people calling you. Now it's machines calling you, and clever lawyers have come up with a theory that kind of automated process, because it doesn't meet some of the specific terms of the act, of the way we implemented the act, have been exempt. The answer is no, it's not. Okay, legitimate calls have always been legitimate and will remain legitimate, but preying on the ability to use a legitimate call as a way to get out and have unwanted calls to American consumers is something that's wrong and something we stop today.
We have one more question.
One more.
Commissioners Kai and O'Reilly have mentioned that they proposed a $1.6 billion spending cap on
right.
The current Lifeline program. Is that too low? Why was that rejected?
So I think the question that you want to make sure that you decide. So let's begin. What we were doing in this NPRM is saying, let's ask the questions that will help us decide what the Lifeline program ought to look like. Then you say, okay, now inside that kind of structure, how do I look at what the costs are going to be? It's a cart before the horse kind of an issue. And so what we were saying was that, look, we're happy to talk in terms of something that goes between now and the end of 2016, when things will beginning to change. But we need to have an escape valve if the bottom falls out of the economy or something like that. But we're unwilling to say that for an as yet undesigned program, we're going to put in a cap, because that's putting things backwards. Let's figure out what we're going to do, then let's figure out how to pay for it.
Are there any other questions from behind the table here? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay, we will now have the Bureau press conference. I think we'll just go in order of the agenda. Are there any questions on the VoIP item? Going once for VoIP? Going twice? Okay, nothing on VoIP. Any questions on the Lifeline item? Going once? Brooks, is that? No? Okay. No?
No.
Okay. Incentive auctions. That's up for bid also. Going once? Okay, we have incentive auction team, please.
I know, but I mean, typically they don't do that when the item's not voted at meeting.
I'm sorry?
Okay, no, I'll ask questions.
Yeah.
The incentive auctions.
Yeah, okay, is the incentive auction team here?
No.
I'm sorry.
Incentive auctions.
I'm sorry. I'm not reading the agenda. This is the robocalls. Excuse me, robocalls. Yeah. Okay, robocalls.
If you said yes, you wouldn't have looked again. You
Right.
would have got your question.
But you would have had the wrong people answering.
Okay, let me ask one quick robocalls question.
Yeah, they're coming.
I'm sorry.
I misspoke. All right.
There was one question that's come up since the item was presented, and that was so it sounded like Commissioner Rosenworcel dissented on one part of the order. So is that? But did that have approval from another commissioner, or is that? I don't understand how that worked exactly.
So that part of the item, it's our understanding, did become effectively the holding of the commission because there were enough votes to carry that item, notwithstanding Commissioner Rosenworcel's dissent.
So that must have had approval from at least one of the
so
Republicans.
I'm not sure if it's out yet, but I'd read the vote sheet when it comes out.
Yeah, but that just question came up, so I thought I'd check.
Understood.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Clyburn mentioned something about requiring the carriage to submit minimum times before reassignment. That wasn't quite clear. Is that actually in the order, or was she saying
The number you can call after reassignment?
I thought she said minimum time. Maybe I misunderstood.
Oh,
we used to call aging. I don't know if they changed
Right. That's not actually in the item. I believe what Commissioner Rosenworcel was suggesting was additional considerations the commission might think about as it moves forward to tackle the robocalls problem.
But there is currently some kind of aging. Would that get eliminated sometime in the long time since I covered this issue closely?
Well, the item itself says post reassignment. There's one additional call to be free of liability.
Traditionally, and I've been doing this for 20 years, but I haven't been doing this. Nobody talks about reassigning numbers in the last 15 years very much. So it used to be back when we cared a lot more about this. There were specific aging times for numbers after they were returned back into the reassigned.
A little bit of time before it goes back into circulation. She did mention that as a possibility,
does that
but
still exist in current rules? Are there still aging requirements in?
So I would have to go back.
Not related to robocalls.
Good question. I'd have to go back and check the rules. That's this item doesn't address that.
We'll
Yep.
get back to you.
Yep.
I had two more, but you can go ahead and I'll come back to me.
Just a quick one. Can you give a little bit more clarity on what are reasonable methods of consumers revoking consent?
Right. Yeah. So the order does not give an exhaustive set of reasonable methods, and in part because this is not a rulemaking where the commission is making brand new rules listing exhaustive methods. But I think it's fair to say the order will mention things that seem fairly common sense. The chairman mentioned going to the kiosk and saying, "Don't call me anymore." If you are on the receiving end of a call, telling the caller, "Don't call anymore." Things like that.
Why weren't like political calls, polling calls? Why weren't they given some sort of carve out? They seem kind of important.
So the by carve out you might mean the calls that are specifically exempted in the item. So you'll certainly get a chance to look at it further, but those exemptions are pursuant to specific requests from parties that are asking for the commission to exercise its exemption authority for a certain set of calls. So bankers were mentioned, as well as healthcare providers with time-sensitive urgent messages that were willing to submit to one of the conditions that's in the Act, free to end user, amongst other things. There was no petition before us on political calls.
So neither one of the parties asked you about it?
one of the parties asked, not with respect to the exemption, no. Other parties have said as a function of what an auto dialer covers, that certain types of calls should be carved out of that. That's the request, not on the specific exemption. It's more related to the equipment. I think what you'll see is that the item notes that the TCPA doesn't distinguish as to what types, the content of the call when it comes to the definition of auto dialer.
I believe it was Commissioner O'Reilly who was suggesting that the way the order is written, there'd be a liability on the part of a caller if they were calling a number they previously called by someone who gave them consent, that person changed the number, it's reassigned, and the recipient never said, I'm not that person, you've got the wrong number, don't call me anymore. They just kept receiving these calls until eventually they want to bring a lawsuit, even though they've never objected. And how is that what the order would do? And how is a caller supposed to have any idea that are you expecting callers every time they make a call to affirmatively ask for basically new consent, which would seem to be the only...
So what the order does is starts off by interpreting the statute and saying the correct reading of the statute is that it's the consent of the actual subscriber rather than the intended recipient. And it says there are tools available to callers to detect reassignment before it actually occurs. Things like a database was mentioned and other sort of best practices that are already in play. Another example might be a caller checking by email or anytime there's an incoming call from a consumer saying, are you still at this number? And then the order says there would be one additional attempt. There would be one additional attempt after post-reassignment to detect that reassignment, and if that doesn't occur, then callers would have to proceed very cautiously or face liability.
And then one final question. The technology that you said, you made clear to carriers that they are allowed to use technological means to block robocalls for their subscribers. And obviously you can't know about every single piece of technology out there, but your understanding at this point, does that technology provide for flexibility for the subscriber to be able to say, well, I want calls from the school saying my kid hasn't shown down, or there's a shooter and there's a lockdown, or if my doctor has an automated system for reminding me of medical appointments or something. I want those calls, but I don't want calls from Heather at Card Services. And so would the technology allow the carrier to be able to distinguish?
So the order doesn't pass on any specific technology. What it does, as the chairman said, is it clears any regulatory uncertainty as to whether carriers can adopt this sort of technology. It certainly will note that the commission is going to be cognizant if these sort of technologies block wanted or desired calls, particularly relating to public safety and things like that.
But it wouldn't. You said today it's okay to use it. So if it turns out it does, when you say you're going to be cognizant if it's blocking wanted calls, does that mean that carriers should be afraid to use technology if they're not sure whether it's going to block wanted calls, or if they can't be absolutely 100% certain that they're blocked?
I think there's an acknowledgement that these aren't always going to be perfect technologies. So I'd encourage you to read the item when it comes out on that point.
Do you expect it out today? Expect it out today, or probably not?
We always endeavor to release as soon as we can, but I can't tell you exactly when it will be released.
Thank you. I think Commissioners Pai and O'Reilly are having a press conference now. Thank you.
So we're just going to start on the end, if anyone has a question, and just work our way down. So
I thought Mignon said it's a press conference, but I have no idea what y'all want to talk about. You don't have this is just a general, like the chairman does. We can ask anything.
Can we call you the chairman?
This is like a Reddit AMA, so yeah.
Were you in, Commissioner O'Reilly, were you in the room during the chairman's press conference?
I was in my office, but I did hear
I'm sorry,
it.
I was talking to Commissioner
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was not in the room. I did catch part of it upstairs in my office.
To paraphrase, he said that he's concerned about your concerns, that you didn't feel that you were dealt with, and that he believes that open dialogue, the dialogue can heal those kinds of issues. Does that I know you didn't hear him, so it's unfair to ask you to say whether he says your concerns, but do you see room for dialogue?
Indicate exactly any particular person, so he must be, guilt in his mind. But that notwithstanding, sure, I'm a good Christian, and I will, help to, and endeavor to forgive whatever circumstance may be before me that I don't agree with. But I think this was, this was just a very interesting process, and I won't let it happen again to me.
Let me just do a follow-up. Let me say that we're going down the line.
On Lifeline, would it be possible to have an order that if it addressed your concerns and also expanded to broadband, that would be acceptable, or do you want to do that in two separate steps?
First, you want mine? Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I was comfortable with that, and I articulated that hopefully in my statement, and if I didn't, I apologize. I thought I was comfortable, even though I would have preferred that we tackle further problems on waste, fraud, and abuse before we did the broadband piece, but I was willing to do that if it addressed the spending part of the equation. And at no point did we get the conversation was, we actually got to a point where we were suggesting a firm budget or a cap, except it had this huge loophole. So there was no real, that we fought for the last couple of weeks trying to get somewhere close on that, and that was made very clear that I needed something along those lines. I think Commissioner Pai mentioned that. We had some other issues. You can see my list in my blog, but had we been able to resolve that issue, I was willing to, and I made very clear to all participants that I would have voted for the item.
I personally made clear weeks ago that I was open to a document that would both propose broadband and propose fiscally responsible reforms. And I was told in no uncertain terms that was off the table. Of course, until yesterday afternoon when belatedly we were given this proposal, which was, as I pointed out in my statement, frankly a joke, to suggest that there was a budget that was expire in 2016 just as the broadband program was starting to get implemented, and as Commissioner O'Reilly pointed out, included this massive loophole that would simply blow a hole in whatever budgetary restraint the proposal would suggest.
I'd like to see if either one of you would like to react to the modified field office closure proposal, as well as the staff recommendations that are going to be forthcoming next week for the incentive auctions, public notice, and the Mobile Spectrum Holdings recon order.
First, so as you know very well, items are before me. I'm prohibited from commenting about them or sharing my views on changes I would like to see. I have pushed aggressively, both here and on Capitol Hill, for changes to our rules that will allow me to discuss such issues. So on the first one, I think it's something before me. I can't really comment too much. On the second part, I don't have but what you have in terms of the comments on what we may see next week or not. So I don't know exactly. I review every item that comes before me, so I look forward to reviewing the document and just see what's proposed beyond the comments of the chairman. That's all I've got.
The same.
Gentlemen, so watching the commission meeting today, it felt like in February that there was a lot of tension, and today there also felt it really, you could almost see the tension in the room. And I thought some of the comments, I've been covering regulatory agencies for a long time, and I thought some of the comments were very sharp on both sides. And so I just wanted to ask you if you can be as honest as possible with, and there's only probably, I don't know how many people are actually watching this, but
it's like Mayweather Pacquiao.
Huge audience, I'm sure.
If you were the first party.
Right. If you could just talk to us a little bit about the state of play at the commission right now, and are things as bad as they seemingly looked today during the meeting?
I think the way I would answer that is to say that since I got to the commission 3 years ago, I've consistently tried to seek a solution. I don't simply say no and take my ball and go home. Unfortunately, over the last 18 months or so, it's increasingly become a case of Charlie Brown, Lucy, and the football. We consistently come forward with a solution that we think would have worked for everybody. Is it what we would like? No. Is it what the majority would like entirely? No. But that's the nature of compromise. And typically, at least speaking for myself, what we're told is, no, this is a red line. No, you can't have that. In some cases, even though we might like that, every single member of the majority has to okay it in every single particular for us to even consider it. And so at the end of the day, you end up with an unprecedented level of 3-2 votes. I mean, who would have guessed that we'd be sitting here looking longingly at the Martin era as a time of collegiality and bipartisan compromise? And we've seen now more sharply divided votes at commission meetings than under the previous, I believe it's 5 chairmen combined. Now, all I can say is that, as I've indicated previously after the net neutrality meeting, I'm going to continue trying to find bipartisan solutions. We had a bipartisan solution on the table with Lifeline that could have been adopted. It could have been a 5-0 vote. Unfortunately, the majority made the determination that it would rather score political points, including at the expense of our integrity, by suggesting that by dissenting, we're against children, poor people, puppies, and what have you. But look, nonetheless, we are in this job to reach results that are good for the American people. And so long as I have the privilege of serving this position, that's the spirit with which I will embrace the job.
So I agree with my colleague. I always seek to find common ground, and we do put forward all recommendations. But I would say that, there's just an approach in general where they're happy to accommodate you if you're going to agree with them. But if you have a difference of opinion, or you have a different approach, or that not every single member of the majority agrees, then you can't. Then it doesn't matter. It's like they all 3 agree on something, or forget it. And so in this instance, we had at least 4 votes for a cap, at least 4. So how many do you know? At what point does the minority of the majority become tyranny?
And just to put a fine point on that, by the way, the proposals we were adopting, as Commissioner O'Reilly pointed out, this is not something that we drew out of our own partisan ether. I mean, if you look at the March 18th Senate Commerce Committee hearing, I think we have that clip, you will see that 4 of us agreed with Senator McCaskill's proposals, including, as she put it, a skin-in-the-game requirement, and again, as she put it, a cap. And actually, can we run that clip? I don't know if AV has the ability to do it, but if we can't, then I would certainly urge you to go back and look at that. I mean, how we say publicly that we agree with the skin-in-the-game requirement and the cap, and yet months later reject those out of hand and question the integrity of the people who suggest it, is beyond me.
Well, I would only follow up and say, if you look at the rest of USF, we cap every other part of it, or have a budget for every other part. But this is the one piece that's, no, we're not going to do, and because we haven't figured out, as the chairman said, we haven't figured out how to spend the money yet. We have to. That's the cart before the horse, right? We don't need a budget until we figure out how much we're going to actually spend, and then we'll figure out part of that upstairs. We'll figure out how to cap it after we've already doubled or tripled the size of it.
To follow on my question to the chairman and your strongly worded comments on yesterday's enforcement action, would either of you support a provision of a draft Senate bill that would allow companies to appeal enforcement fines before they have to pay them? Do you think that, or are there other modifications, I guess, to
So why leave the good work of legislating to my old friends and former colleagues? They are best to determine how to change the law or not, so I'd have to leave it to their capable hands on draft legislation.
And I simply haven't had a chance to review the text of the legislation you're suggesting, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about the NAL that was issued yesterday in particular.
Alina Selig with Reuters. I'd also like to follow up on the question I asked the chairman. Do either of you have reason to believe or some kind of factual findings that indicate that Dish Network's partners violated rules in applying for designated entity credits in the AWS auction?
On this issue, I can't and won't say anything beyond what I've already said in terms of what happened during the AWS 3 auction. What I will say is that the conduct during that auction suggests strongly that the FCC going forward must substantially reform its designated entity rules to ensure that that kind of abuse never happens again. And that's why I was pleased that the FCC teed up at least 41 different ideas that were suggested in the record and from my office for responsible reform of the DE program. Whenever we end up putting pen to paper, I hope that that is a bipartisan vote in favor of the original purpose of the program and that is consistent with the principle of helping small businesses rather than Fortune 500 corporations.
I just need, there's something before us, so I need to refrain from commenting.
Yes. Can you, again, tell us briefly why you don't think the robocall order today will be effective?
Well, what I've articulated is a viewpoint of the order, and you'll get a chance to read it, that goes after legitimate businesses versus bad actors in the space. So when we talked about reassigned numbers being one of the biggest categories, there are two categories, the big issues, and that's why I said in my statement they did some carve-outs and did some of the petitions in very narrow ways, but there are two big issues, the auto dialer issue and the reassigned number issue. And on reassigned numbers, you know, there's a situation where your number's been reassigned to him, you don't even know, you call, this is a question that Lynn asked to the last presenter, and that is, you know, I make a call to you, you just sit on the line, there's a free call, I call you again, or maybe you weren't there the first time, but I call you again, and you just wait and you accumulate, and we can keep accumulating complaints, and then you file a class action lawsuit. And there's nothing, you know, the examples that they used, they were like, well, there's a database you can test. They admit in the item that it's not sufficient, and actually you get no safe harbor for using the databases that do exist. So like they're not effective and you get no safe harbor for actually using the database. So as a company, and I think it gets to the question that Lynn asked, is you have to pull back and say, wait a second, I'm not going to, until I'm sure that I'm calling the right person. How do I know that I'm calling the right person? You look at the record and what you got from Twitter. How do I know that you don't change your number, but today you're getting, you know, text from Twitter? If it goes to him, he's like, wait, keep sending me. I'm gonna sue the heck out of you. So this is a way to encourage more lawsuits, more class action lawsuits against legitimate businesses trying to offer legitimate services. Where I'm not, and where I think there was common agreement, is nobody's for abusive robocalling. But I think this is far beyond where they tried to go.
I would agree with that, and I would simply say that if you look at the particular examples I gave, the Los Angeles Lakers facing a class action lawsuit for offering its fans a chance to text the Jumbotron. Taxi Magic facing a class action lawsuit for daring to let its customers know that a cab was on its way. Rubio's Restaurants facing a class action for trying to text one of its own employees about food safety repeatedly. I mean, these are not made-up examples. These are documented in the record. They're in the petitions. These are all in the petitions, and what does the FCC say about it? Tough luck. Essentially, it's a strict liability standard where any legitimate company, even if it has no reason to know that it is calling a reassigned number, for example, nonetheless it's going to face liability. How does that produce anything for the American consumer? It only adds to the cost of doing business, which ultimately is passed on to the consumer. And I would simply add there are others, as I pointed out in my statement, absurd implications that any consumer could go into any single business and simply say, I want out. And the example I gave was McDonald's. I mean, a harried cashier has to be trained on the nuances of consumer consent under the TCPA. Some customer just simply comes in and says, I'm not loving it, and just walks out. What are you supposed to do exactly? It's nonsensical to suggest that the TCPA has a role here, but nonetheless, that's exactly what the Commission did. I would add also, as Commissioner Rosenworcel did, that actually makes the robocalling worse in some cases by exempting industries like the prison payphone industry. So those kinds of robocalls are now legitimate, and I can imagine other businesses seeing that, as I pointed out, as a roadmap for trying to shoehorn into the exemption their own robocalling practices, which are probably not wanted by consumers.
Well, and my colleague highlights a revocation of consent. There's a great example where the item is making clear that it's any reasonable method they can extract. But if you're an online-only company, you have to now accept all of these other mechanisms. What is as he highlights, is it a kiosk in a store? Well, what is it you have to receive? All of this type of information, if you agree that we're only going to communicate by email, and they start sending you letters to revoke your consent. It's any means. The complete power is put with the consumer, which sounds nice in and of itself. But here's an agreement that they've already reached with the consumer.
Hi there. I was wondering, how many net neutrality complaints do each of you anticipate this year? Do you think they're mostly going to be filed by companies, consumers, websites? Is this going to be in like single digits, hundreds?
I think the chairman put it best on February 26th. We don't know where we go from here.
I honestly have no idea how many we're going to see or by whom. We started to see, if I read your good works, we started to see a couple already.
I will point out that we are seeing now requests to extend the decision. As you might have seen, Consumer Watchdog filed a petition to require Internet companies to abide by do not track requests, which according to Consumer Watchdog, they aren't doing. So that's a question for Google, Mozilla, other companies to grapple with. That, as Commissioner O'Reilly and I pointed out on February 26th and virtually every day since, is just a necessary, is a concomitant of the FCC's decision to inject itself into the area of Internet regulation. And that's something that we're unfortunately going to have to grapple with.
Yeah, I've said, I mean, you know, who would have suggested that edge providers could be potentially on the hook for this? Oh, wait, I did.
In light of the enforcement action yesterday and reports that a complaint might be brought against Time Warner Cable sometime this week, can you just to piggyback on the last question, what should we draw from those sort of cases about the trajectory of the Commission moving forward and its role in regulating broadband?
No, go ahead.
So the draw from the Commission's...
What can we learn about where the Commission is headed in the future?
I mean, the tea leaves are starting to form that the agency is determined to exercise every last measure of authority it gave itself under President Obama's plan to regulate the Internet, whether it is injecting itself into disputes about interconnection, whether it is throwing the book at companies based on newly adopted rules that are applied retroactively in disregard of the actual facts, whether it is apparently going to have to entertain petitions to extend its Internet regulations even further to cover other players in the Internet ecosystem. There's no telling where things are going to go from here, which is precisely why the Commissioner and I have long said that while everyone supports an open Internet, these regulations were going to create massive uncertainty in the marketplace that ultimately is going to harm consumers.
I would say that, and I agree with my colleague wholeheartedly, but I would add to that I am worried and expressed concerns that the Enforcement Bureau does not look to the experts in the agency and the policy side of the equation before making some of these decisions. I'm worried that some of the numbers that they're articulating in items look an awful lot like a dart being thrown at a board. I mean, 100 million, that doesn't seem to be based on any particular hard data in terms of equating a number. So I'm very troubled on where we're going on the direction, and I'm really worried regarding the efforts of the non-experts in the Commission having such a broad authority.
I'm curious to know, were you pleased by the advancement of an appropriations rider that would essentially defund the implementation of the net neutrality rules pending the litigation?
Yes. I would add to that this was a bipartisan vote, 31-19, in favor of a more restrained approach to the more restrained approach than the agency adopted on February 26th. The power of the purse is one of the core constitutional powers that Congress enjoys, and they have every right to make the policy determination that we have to abide by.
I might have to refer to my earlier comment and leave the congressional work to the legislators on best. There are different components to the bill itself. There's these three. People talked about the 21 days. What do I think about that? And I've left that to the Congress and determine the best. I have articulated viewpoints on 21 days. I do think, in and of it's separate from the legislation, I do think that's valuable. So, but in general, I have to leave that to the Congress to decide.
More broadly, though, are you comfortable with the approach of Congress defunding the order?
That's Congress's complete prerogative, and I leave it to their capable hands to decide what's best.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Could you discuss your preferences on the reserve for the incentive auction on that issue? Should it be bigger, smaller, not exist at all?
My general position is that the free market should determine who wins and who loses in spectrum auctions. And to the extent the government starts micromanaging who can participate on what terms and essentially picking winners and losers, ultimately the government is going to lose because of reduced revenue. We see that in the example of Canada recently. The particular companies are going to lose because they're not allowed to participate in the acquisition of spectrum that is needed to deliver wireless services, and consumers are going to lose because ultimately, as we all know from the Coase theorem, the key is to keep transaction costs low so that spectrum flows to its highest valued use, and that's something the agency prevents from happening when it maintains this very strict upfront transaction cost, which is a reserve. And so I'm glad to see on a bipartisan basis, at least, there is some agreement that an unlimited reserve is something that's bad, but the key is, at least from my perspective, to preserve the free market in terms of the auctions as best we can.
Well, as I articulated when this decision was made to create the reserve, I don't support a reserve. And so I just don't see, I don't think it's helpful. My colleague highlighted a number of good reasons. I would agree with those. There's so many more. So I'm not in favor of a reserve.
Thank you.
Commissioner O'Reilly.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for the little plug on my music festival there. I have to say that
I wasn't able to make it.
I was kind of disappointed at the lack of participation by the panel. You know, I can only assume that despite the dissension up there, that you're united in your distaste for rock and roll. Seriously, and the follow-up to the question that was asked at the other end of the table: who lied to you?
What's that?
Who lied to you? Who told you something and then, took it away?
I think I was necessary to make that point. I don't think I want to get into the particulars of my relationships. I just suffice it to say it was something I thought we were working together on and coming to an agreement that we both could live with, and then made very clear that something had happened along the process to jerk to complete left and get to the outcome that we have today.
Can we hope that, press hope this will become a regular practice after commission meetings? And B, could we hope that you'd set a good example for the chairman and allow more than one question per reporter?
Speaking just for myself, I don't want to commit to Commissioner O'Reilly in anything. I'd be more than happy to do it. I think I frankly don't understand why it hasn't been done before, and I've been pleased by the fact that there has been generally positive reception to making ourselves available. I think if the majority wants to promote its own vision of what just happened, there's no reason why members of the minority shouldn't be able to do so as well. And as to the one question practice, I'm more than happy to take any and all of your questions anytime. That's part of the spirit of the job, I think.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. If you have questions, I'll answer them. You don't have to be if people are like, I don't want to do that. But I'm happy to, the extent there's interest. And I don't have a one-question policy. I don't know where that came from.
I also think we shouldn't underestimate the consumer benefit. I mean, this is massively compelling television, and so we're delivering something for the public that hasn't been done before. I mean, this is really, it's amazing. Yeah.
Do you think Netflix should stream you? Is that what you're suggesting? So
whether it's Netflix, Crackle, Hulu, I don't really care. I think that the key is making sure that every American has a chance to see what's happening here.
So I just want to clarify. The staff was asked us, Commissioner O'Reilly, did you, in the robocall item, you dissented in part and approved in part, correct?
Correct.
Did you approve on the area where Commissioner Rosenworcel dissented?
I haven't.
The staff indicated they thought there were 3 votes for that portion, but it would have to be
yes.
voting for
So
it.
I was comfortable voting for in areas that we provided what I would call relief in the item. So some clarity that provided businesses clarifications on what practices that they're already doing, legitimate businesses. So I voted for that. I'm not sure it's workable, to be honest with you. I think that the language, it was becoming more restrictive as we kept going along the process. And so I am concerned that we haven't actually, that it may not be functional. And so I'm really worried that it won't work, I guess is a better statement. And so I'm completely comfortable providing relief. I wanted much more relief than we provided.
During the chairman's press conference, he alluded to some of these interconnection agreements that have been struck just in the weeks before the net neutrality order went into effect as sort of a good sign that the players can work it out themselves. I'm wondering if you have a view on a different look at that.
it's amazing what you can credit an item to do. I'm sure it also produced the great weather we're having. So people, companies tend to make decisions for multiple reasons. Some are in their best business interest. I don't know. I haven't talked to them to know if they made decisions based on what they thought the hammer may come down from from whomever here at the commission. I don't have better insight.
I can't approve upon the Commissioner O'Reilly's answer.
Brian?
On Lifeline, is there a minimum threshold for broadband that you would support or could support for that item?
Threshold in terms of speed?
Broadband speeds yeah.
Well, as we know, there's no such thing as broadband if it's under 25 megabits per second, according to the majority, so I guess that has to be our standard. But more seriously, I think I guess I wouldn't even reach that question. The predicate question is, if we are going to expand it to broadband, are we also going to adopt fiscally responsible reforms that make the enterprise worthwhile in the first place? Once we answer that question in the affirmative, then I would be open to what exactly would constitute broadband. I mean, obviously, I think, given the statements that I've made previously, we should pick one standard that gives the average consumer the functionality that he or she needs and stick with it, as opposed to these politically motivated decisions, 25 megabits per second one week, 10 megabits per second the next, and virtually any broadband connection in the case of net neutrality.
I might answer it this way. I think the item proposes a number of different ways to go about what standards, and we're going to ask a bunch of questions on what are the metrics on that. But if you look at the pilot project report, if you look at, there's certainly some problems with how that document and the results and whether you can, GAO highlights, maybe they're not scientifically significant in a number of instances. But even if you were just to set that aside and you look at it, you do see where consumers were, at least in many of the instances, more comfortable with something that was less expensive versus a higher speed. So I am concerned about if everything has to be 25.3, then there were those consumers that were, if it's about how do we fit into to their pocketbook, how do we fit into their budget, I do have concerns about raising it to a standard where it blows through some of the existing technologies.
Anyone else?
Is it your expectation that the FCC will vote on AT&T DirecTV in July?
I have no idea. I await any recommendation, and I just don't know.
You're asking the wrong people.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.